Chapter 1245. Feng Ling nodded and felt that what he said made sense. At the same time, she asked, "Then what should I do now? There's still a few hours before lunch. There's no need for me to boil water and cook now. Teach me how to use these tools. I'll help you, okay?" Li Nanheng stopped his movements and glanced at her. He saw that Feng Ling was sitting on the small stool made of a few remaining pieces of wood and looking at him with one hand holding her chin. He sighed with a smile. "I don't need your help. If you really have nothing to do, why don't you dance for me?" "Feng Ling," the man raised his eyebrows. "Why are you looking at me like this?" Feng Ling put down her hand and said with a stern face, "I don't know how to dance." He smiled. "Oh yes, you really don't know. Feng Ling, then why don't you do a set of boxing or those basic close combat moves from the base? It looks good when you link them together. Why don't you do it for me?" "No, you know how to do this. Why don't you do it? You taught me. In front of you. This is called showing off in front of an expert. If I do something wrong, you'll scold me. I won't do it." Li Nanheng was amused. "I only scolded you when you first came to the base. At that time, your physical strength was indeed inferior to others, and some of your basic movements were not standard. Do you still hold a grudge against me after I taught you a few lessons? I'm telling the truth. You used to scold me a lot." Feng Ling rolled her eyes at him. Li Nanheng chuckled. He liked how she was less and less able to hide her emotions. "Then what should I do? I can't bear this grudge for a lifetime. Why don't I stay down for the next few nights? So that you can suppress my arrogance?" Feng Ling ignored him. She didn't know how to build a house or a bed, but she could make some small stools. She walked over and picked up a few pieces of wood that had been cut off. She found a few pieces that were relatively neat, as though she had found a treasure. She quickly took them to the side and put them together to make some small stools or other simple things. Seeing that she had clearly begun to like making small things in the past few days, and then looking at her carefully studying a few wooden boards, Li Nanheng smiled faintly and continued to do the unfinished work at hand. The amount of work needed to build a bed was definitely not as huge as building a house. The house had to pay attention to all kinds of details, such as waterproof and rainproof. There were also layers of boards inside and outside the house to block the wooden cracks and other auxiliary things. As for the bed, it was relatively faster as long as it was firm and sturdy. After Li Nanheng finished building the bed, he placed it in a suitable position against the wall in the room. Then he noticed that the room probably lacked a set of tables and chairs for eating. This was more or less enough. There was no hurry. Recently, Feng Ling also wanted to make some small things. He could slowly teach her how to make them and accompany her. This way, she could also find some interest. The two of them had lived in the city for many years. In such a quiet life in the jungle where they didn't even need to turn on their phones, they didn't feel bored at all. In fact, they felt that this kind of life was so peaceful that they could let go of all the grudges outside. Feng Ling calmed down and did not mind much about the Feng family and Feng Mingzhu. After all, in the past 20 years, she hadn't had any contact with the Feng family. It seemed that she had nothing to do with that family except for a blood relationship. Although Feng Mingzhu was extremely selfish and narrow-minded, the elders of the Feng family were not heartless people. In this way, Feng Ling did not have too many complaints, dissatisfaction, or hatred, nor did she have any feelings of being touched or thinking about. If she left the jungle one day and returned to the outside world, Feng Ling would go to the Feng family to take a look. If the Feng family insisted, she would go to the Feng family to take a look and personally remove her mourning haul. She would tell them that she was still alive and thank them for giving birth to her. She would return to the Feng family, but she would only acknowledge them. She would not stay in the Feng family. She would still be the same Feng Ling. If the Feng family chose to be quiet and not disturb her, she would remain silent and not reveal the truth. It would be best to maintain the status quo. Feng Ling knew that no matter how peaceful and happy her life in this jungle was, sooner or later, she would still have to go back. Both of them had things to bear on their shoulders. This kind of peaceful life could only exist in books and stories. In reality, they both had responsibilities to bear. Feng Ling learned things very quickly. Although Li Nanheng had never learned any carpentry, Men were all agile and had a natural sensitivity to these things, so he helped her build a house bit by bit. After she learned how to make the wooden boards, she spent a week building tables, chairs, and other small items with him. The wooden house that belonged to them was complete and did not even lack any furniture. After they officially moved in, Feng Ling opened the wooden cabinet in the house, took out a clean set of clothes that belonged to Li Nanheng, and walked out. Before she walked to the stream, she heard the sound of water splashing. She craned her neck to look over, only to see Li Nanheng biting a blade of grass in his mouth. The tall and straight man was standing there bare-chested. With one hand, he lifted the flowing water in the clear stream onto his body, while the other hand was on his waist. With the grass in his mouth, he looked like a grandfather who was the king of the forest. There seemed to be something moving around the man's feet. Feng Ling walked over and saw that it was a small wild boar. However, its two front trotters were tied to a rock with a rope, and it was struggling with all its might. She then looked at the man who was standing calmly by the side, taking a shower. She didn't even need to think to know that this little wild pig had foolishly bumped into the leather boots of this man. Otherwise, how could he be tied up here so miserably? She walked over with a smile, squatted down, and placed the clothes in her hand on the clean rock by the side. Then she picked up the little wild boar's pair of pig trotters with her hand, and the little thing struggled even more happily. There are quite a few birds and beasts in this jungle every day. We have a good balance of meat and vegetables here. Why did you tie it here? It's too small. If you want to eat it, you have to wait until it grows up. Otherwise, I won't be able to do it, she suddenly said. Both of them came from the base, and their ears had always been sharp. Besides, they had lived here together for so long. Before Feng Ling approached, Li Nanheng heard that it was her. He did not turn back, but stood there and splashed water on his body. Hearing her words, the man looked back at her. If it were any other woman, he would have picked her up and said that he couldn't bear to eat or kill her. However, in her mouth, it became that even if he wanted to eat it, he had to wait until it grew older. Then I'll raise it before eating it. Raise? Who will raise it? You. Feng Ling pointed at herself, and then at the little wild boar on the ground. Li Nanheng, it's enough to raise you. You still wanting to raise a pig? Chapter 1246. Li Nanheng, it's enough to raise you alone. Why do you want me to raise a pig? There was nothing wrong with the second half of this sentence, but the first half made Li Nanheng's brows twitch, and he stopped splashing water on his body. Then he suddenly smiled meaningfully and looked at her. Come here. Seeing the man's dangerous smile, Feng Ling's fingers were still hooking the front hooves of the little wild boar. Listening to the little pig's cries, she said firmly and decisively, No. Li Nanheng immediately squinted at her. Feng Ling continued to tease the little wild boar that was already crying anxiously. She was about to untie it when Li Nanheng walked up from the stream. The man's upper body was bare, and the trousers of his trousers were also wet, but it did not affect the man's handsome appearance at all. He walked over and said, If you dare to let her go if I don't roast it tonight, I'll roast you and eat you. Feng Ling paused and rolled her eyes at him. Even if I bring a pile of wild boar meat and place it in front of you, you'll still eat me. You speak as though you'll let me sleep peacefully in bed one night. With that, she pointed to the little wild boar. And this is too small. It looks like it was born less than half a month ago. If you want to eat fresh and tender meat, you have to look at the size. This kind of meat is not fresh and tender. It's too tender. It's not delicious at all. Li Nanheng looked at her condescendingly and narrowed his eyes. Then do as I say. Raise it first and eat it when it grows up. The corner of Feng Ling's mouth twitched. I don't lack food. Why do I have to raise it? Even if humans live at the top of the food chain, they have feelings for it. How can they eat it? If you don't want to eat it, then raise it. It just so happens that I lack a living creature by my side. It can help you relieve your boredom. There are so many living creatures in this jungle. Why don't I catch a few non-poisonous snakes and let them sleep under our bed every day? Li Nanheng snorted, bent down to hold her chin, and decisively kissed her hard on the lips. When Feng Ling was kissed until she almost fell to the ground, he said hoarsely, Up to you. If you like such excitement, I'll accompany you. Excitement? The excitement of raising snakes under the bed. I shudder at the thought. Feng Ling quickly slapped his hand away. I don't want to raise you. I don't want to raise anyone else. Let this little wild boar go. Let's eat something else. The man saw that she insisted on letting it go and had no objection. Feng Ling quickly released the little wild boar's front hooves. The little thing howled twice and quickly turned around and jumped far away. This thing's running speed was not like that of poultry. Wild boars were born with fast speed. The reason why Feng Ling was fast was because when she was young, she had to be fast in order to eat in the jungle. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to catch anything. You're not going to shower anymore. Seeing that the man did not take the little wild boar seriously and was about to kiss her again, she raised her hand to block him. I'm covered in sweat, Li Nanhing chuckled. He recalled that he had been busy for a long time in the morning and was covered in sweat. Her body was clean and emitted a fresh smell. He kissed her lips again, but this time, he only tasted it lightly and did not go too deep. He turned and went back to the stream to take a shower. This stream was very shallow. Many places were only more than 10 centimeters deep. The deepest place was where he was standing, but it was barely up to the man's waist. The man stood there and leaned back leisurely. He picked up a blade of grass and held it in his mouth. Feng Ling watched for a while, walked over, and deliberately splashed water on his head. The man did not dodge but teased. Why? Do you want to help your husband shower personally? What husband? Up until now, Feng Ling was too embarrassed to call him husband. This man kept calling her little wife every day. Furthermore, before she slept, she had asked him about it. The reason why Li Nanheng had never explained to her about marrying the cenotaph was because the Feng and Li families had an agreement. Within 3 years, no one could know that the Li family had married the Feng family cenotaph. After all, this kind of thing was too unbelievable to outsiders. In order to respect a dead child and not let others spread rumors, he had to abide by this 3-year agreement. Within 3 years, he would not marry another woman and would not explain this strange marriage. However, this was only a verbal agreement between the two families. It was not like they were really married. Furthermore, to Li Nanheng, he only married a few pieces of clothes she had worn when she was young. However, he had been shamelessly calling her his little wife all day long, as if she had completely and utterly belonged to him. She splashed the water on his head again and looked at the old scars on his back that were not too obvious but could be seen. These scars were not ugly on his body. As a man who came out of 11 base, it was impossible for him not to have a few old scars on his body. People did not live in a fairy tale world. No one was perfect and invincible, and it was inevitable to have some injuries occasionally. However, the gunshot wound on the back of his shoulder. Feng Ling placed her hand on his gunshot wound. She had once used a dagger to help him remove the bullet here. At that time, the man was sweating in pain but did not make a sound. At that time, in Boston, he protected her in his arms and helped her block the bullet. Later, although he was clearly so weak, he still raised his gun and appeared when she was almost surrounded, like a god descending. Her fingers stroked there for a long time. The man saw that her hand did not leave and gently rubbed it repeatedly. He knew what she was thinking and raised his hand to press her hand there. If you want to help me bathe, come down and bathe together. Don't secretly take advantage of me. Who took advantage of you? Feng Ling patted his hand again and lowered her head to look at the grass in his mouth. You haven't smoked since you came here. Are you addicted to smoking again? The man didn't answer directly. He just casually leaned back, narrowed his eyes, and looked at the fine light sprinkling down from the dense leaves above. He just responded with a shallow, I saw that there were a few boxes in the travel bag you brought, but why haven't you smoked? The man curved his lips slightly and said leisurely, It's not safe to smoke in the jungle. After all, this is the place where you lived when you were young. It's too clean and has too many memories of you. It can't be polluted by any external things, not even secondhand smoke. W. 4M. Chapter 1247. She knew that this man was usually so bad that it was impossible for him to have such a profound consciousness. But he really didn't smoke since he came here. Sometimes she saw men holding a blade of grass in their mouths. She had heard from some brothers in the base who wanted to quit smoking that quitting smoking was like detoxification. Although it was not as painful, it was not good either. The way to relieve this discomfort was to put something in their mouth. It was good to eat some snacks. If there were no snacks, they would hold something to relieve their addiction, but she didn't know how long it would take to really quit. In the past, Li Nanheng did smoke a lot, and she occasionally told him to smoke less. It was okay to smoke, but not too much. She was afraid that his body couldn't take it. Now, in this clean and fresh jungle, after not smoking for several months, his lungs seemed to have been washed by the air several times. Feng Ling curved her lips slightly and hugged his neck from behind. As if rewarding him, she kissed his wet hair. After Feng Ling disappeared for 4 months, Li Nanheng also disappeared for half a year after temporarily leaving the base. However, before Boss Li left, he arranged a lot of things in the base. He also went back to the Li family to make sure that the elders were in good health and everything that he needed to worry about was taken care of before leaving. Therefore, this half a year was neither fast nor slow, and there weren't many troublesome matters. Occasionally, there were some problems that needed Boss Li to deal with and make a decision himself. The base hall couldn't get through to him, so they could only send him a message. However, after a message was sent, it would take a few days for Li Nanheng to reply. There was almost no signal in the jungle. Occasionally, there would be some weak signals when they walked a little further away. There was a solar charger developed by the United Nations Science and Technology Museum in 11 Base, so the power of his cell phone could last a long time. However, because there was nothing troublesome, Li Nanheng didn't touch his cell phone most of the time. After all, he still had the Li family and the base behind him, so he couldn't really leave them alone. Occasionally, he would take a few minutes to reply to messages and deal with problems. Half a year ago, it was still the transition season between spring and summer, and in the blink of an eye, it was almost winter. However, because Li Nanheng was here, Feng Ling didn't have to sit by the fire every day. The cabin was warm and comfortable every day. Feng Ling watched as the man returned with his phone and knew that he had gone to find a place with a signal to reply to a message. She supported her chin with one hand and leaned against the window of the cabin. She watched the man's tall and straight figure and thought about how the two of them had unknowingly spent half a year here. For half a year, they didn't separate from each other at all times. This kind of time was something that they had never experienced before, but it was also so short that it made people wonder if life was really fleeting. How come it's been half a year? It was true that she had left for too long. She had enough time to rest and recuperate, but she couldn't bear to part with this place. She couldn't bear to part with Li Nanheng every day and night, and she couldn't bear to part with this home they had built bit by bit. As time dragged on, winter came in the blink of an eye. Li Nanheng walked back to the cabin and was about to throw the phone back on the bed when he saw that Feng Ling was holding her own phone. She hadn't touched her phone in months. "Help me charge my phone too," she said. Li Nanheng glanced at her. "What are you doing? In a few months, after this winter, the weather will warm up. Let's go back." Feng Ling raised her phone. "Before I go back, I have to restore contact with my old friends and take the time to answer their various questions. Otherwise, when we go back one day, I'll probably be drowned by their questions and saliva. If you don't want to go back, you don't have to force yourself to go back." "How can I not want to go back? I just came out for a few months on vacation. It's not like I want to be out of touch with this world." Feng Ling placed her phone on the bed. "And it's impossible to live in such a place for the rest of your life, unless you're completely carefree. But how can you be carefree in this world? Even people like me, who have no family since I was young, have responsibilities that I have to shoulder, let alone you." Feng Ling put her phone on the bed. Li Nanheng looked at her, but did not say anything. He walked over, picked up her phone, glanced at it, and then looked at her. "Are you willing?" "Of course." Feng Ling also looked at him seriously. "Besides, I haven't officially married you yet. Don't tell me you really plan to use the reason of marrying my cenotaph to make me your wild wife in this deep mountain forest? I don't even have a proper marriage process. I'm afraid I won't be able to die in peace." Li Nanheng chuckled. "Just because of this? What else do you want?" Feng Ling tilted her head and glared at him. "All right, I'll get married when I go back. I'll marry you first." The man nodded and helped her connect her phone to the solar charger. He then reached out and hugged the little woman who was becoming more and more intimate with him. He let her sit on his lap. You can only be tied to me for the rest of your life. After all, I made a vow in front of the Feng family's 2 elders and the Li family's 4 elders. Feng Ling had never heard of his vow, but from this sentence, she could guess how much this man had done for her after knowing that she was the Feng family's 2nd daughter. She asked, "What vow did you make in front of them?" The man's cold brows moved slightly. Even though there was no one around except for the birds and beasts in the jungle, he still bent down and whispered a few words into her ear. When she suddenly heard this man say that he would never marry anyone except the 2nd daughter of the Feng family, her face instantly heated up. She raised her hand to slap his face away, but the man held her head and kissed her. He turned around and pressed her down on the bed. Los Angeles, the Feng family. Bang! In the hall of the Feng family, Tang Sankai was almost knocked down by old Madame Feng. She stood in place in shock, looking at Feng Mingzhu and Qin Xiu who were arguing inside. The servants rushed forward to support the expensive Tang Sankai and old Madame Feng. At this time, Grandfather Feng also entered the door. Seeing the situation inside, he immediately frowned. What happened? Feng Mingzhu abruptly turned her eyes and saw her grandfather and grandmother who had entered the door. Her eyes, which were already red from crying, instantly turned even redder. She clenched her fists tightly. "Tell me, how long have you known?" Qin Xiu was still glaring at her. For the first time, Qin Xiu, who had been used to speaking gently and softly to her daughter, spoke to her in such an attitude. Her eyes were even redder than Feng Mingzhu's. W. 4M. Chapter 1248. What's wrong? Why are you arguing here? Grandfather Feng suddenly shouted. At the same time, he saw a stack of documents on the coffee table. He narrowed his eyes and walked over. When Grandfather Feng was about to touch the stack of documents, Feng Mingzhu suddenly reached out and grabbed them as if she had been electrocuted. She messed up the documents and scattered them on the ground. She didn't want them to see them. Seeing her action, Qin Xiu was so angry that her eyes turned red and her forehead twitched. "Mingzhu, that's your sister." Before Grandfather Feng could figure out what was going on, he abruptly raised his old but bright eyes to look at Qin Xiu. "What?" At this moment, Grandmother Feng walked over tremblingly with the help of a servant. She looked at Feng Mingzhu and Qin Xiu in shock. "When you two were arguing just now, you said that my poor little granddaughter was still alive. She was still alive, right? Did I hear wrong?" Feng Mingzhu had obtained the 2nd DNA report of Feng Ling a long time ago. After checking it, she threw it into the safe. After so long, she almost forgot about it. This morning, she asked her mother to help her go back to her room to get something from the safe, but she saw it. Although Qin Xiu had long guessed that Feng Ling was her daughter, after all, Feng Ling didn't seem to want to go home. Besides, Feng Ling looked very peaceful and happy in 11 base. She only wanted to see her daughter happy. Although she wanted to acknowledge her, she couldn't bear to disturb her, so she didn't pursue the matter. Although she thought about it every day, she didn't dare to acknowledge her. However, when she suddenly saw this DNA report, the truth that Feng Ling was her 2nd daughter was completely revealed to her. Most importantly, this DNA report was in Mingzhu's safe. This meant that she had long known about Feng Ling, but for so long, she had remained silent at home. In the past 10 months, she had changed from an ignorant and incompetent young lady to someone who had frequently come into contact with the affairs of the Feng family's major companies and was working hard to take over the inheritance of the Feng family. Qin Xiu thought that her eldest daughter had grown up after those things. She didn't expect that this was the reason. She was furious. She even hated her daughter for failing to live up to her expectations. This child was actually worried that her sister would be recognized one day. She was afraid that everything would be taken away or everything would be taken away. She was so sensitive that, even after knowing the truth, she did not say a word. She had been quietly hiding this fact. That was why Qin Xiu took advantage of the time when there was no one at home to look for Feng Mingzhu. Coincidentally, Feng Mingzhu had just returned from the company and drank some wine outside, but she was not very drunk. As soon as she entered the door, she was stopped by Qin Xiu. Qin Xiu threw the DNA report and all the documents about Feng Ling on the coffee table and asked her what she thought. At that time, Feng Mingzhu was stunned for a moment. Her eyes first turned from confusion to panic, and then from panic to coldness. In the end, the mother and daughter quarreled. Qin Xiu's disappointment and question, as well as Feng Mingzhu's anger and sharp voice, were heard by the old madam who had entered the door a few minutes earlier. Then, Grandfather Feng entered the door. As if knowing that she couldn't hide it anymore, Feng Mingzhu looked at the messy documents and DNA report on the coffee table and asked in a shrill voice, "So what if she's alive? I haven't had any family for 20 years. So what if she's alive? I'm your granddaughter. I'm your daughter. I'm your beloved. Even if she's still alive, she won't come back. What else do you have to worry about?" Qin Xiu was furious. She had never thought of forcing Feng Ling to return to this family, but Mingzhu actually looked at all of this from such a twisted perspective. Fortunately, there was a servant to support her. She couldn't believe it. She raised her hand in disbelief, trembled, and then put it down. "She's alive. She's really alive. My little granddaughter is still alive." Grandfather Feng was also excited, but after all, he was old and had seen decades of storms. Back then, he could withstand the news that his granddaughter had died at the bottom of the sea. How could he not be able to withstand it now? He looked at Feng Mingzhu's red eyes, then at Qin Xiu, and then at the documents on the floor. He turned his head and gave a look to the helper next to him. The helper only dared to go up and pick up the papers after receiving the old man's order. "If you dare to pick them up, tear them all. Tear them all." Feng Mingzhu shouted angrily. She regretted it. If she had known, she would have torn these things up and destroyed them all. Back then, she only felt that it was necessary to keep these things. After all, if she wanted to do something in the future, it might be very troublesome to check them again. So she simply hid them in the safe. She didn't expect that they would become a time bomb now. Grandfather Feng was the head of the family. The servant didn't dare to look at her. She hurriedly picked up the things and tidied them up. When she saw the contents of the documents, she quickly controlled the excited expression on her face and quickly handed them to Grandfather Feng. Grandmother Feng rushed over and stood by the elder's side, watching him flip through them one by one. When she saw all the information about Feng Ling, including Feng Ling's photo and the contents of the DNA test report, Grandmother Feng was so excited that she suddenly snatched the document with Feng Ling's photo. She stared at the short-haired but calm smile on the girl's face. She raised her trembling hand and carefully touched it. Tears fell. "This is my little granddaughter." The servants were also excited. After all, they were all old servants of the Feng family. After the second miss was born, they also took care of the child for an entire year. The death of this child was a huge blow to the entire Feng family. Now that this child was still alive, everyone was very excited. Seeing their excited expressions, Feng Mingzhu's eyes were filled with a destructive blow. She staggered back, looked at the things in their hands, and then turned to look at Qin Xiu, who was holding her chest in anger. "Mom, you knew it long ago. Did you know it, but you didn't say it? Now you're blaming me?" Qin Xiu took a deep breath and suddenly raised her hand to slap her. "I didn't say it because I respected her choice. I didn't want to disturb her current peace. I just wanted her to live happily outside. But you hid these things and refused to say it. You know why. W4M. Chapter 1249. Since she was born, she had never been slapped by her mother. This sudden slap caused Feng Mingzhu to stagger back. She looked at her grandparents, who suddenly raised their eyes to look at her. She saw the excitement in their eyes and the flash of surprise. Mingzhu already knew. Grandfather Feng's hands trembled as he held the documents, but his voice was directed at Feng Mingzhu. "Why didn't you tell me?" Feng Mingzhu bit her lips and looked at them coldly. Qin Xiu was so angry that she clutched her chest and sat on the sofa. Grandmother Feng was still very agitated. She kept staring at the girl in the photo and then raised her eyes to look at them. "Where is this child now? Where is she?" Grandfather Feng lowered his head to continue reading the documents in his hands. As he read, he said, "There's information here. Her name is Feng Ling. This is an 11 base. Grandfather Feng's expression suddenly froze. He whispered in surprise, "She's in Linaning's place?" The two old men gathered together and kept looking at the documents as though they couldn't wait to see a living person in front of them. As Grandfather Feng finished reading all the documents, he could no longer maintain his composure. He asked Qin Qiu anxiously, "Xiao Qiu, have you seen this child?" Qin Qiu's anger eased a little. She moved her hand away from her chest and said softly, "It's a coincidence. When I accompanied my mother out to buy things, my mother's bag was stolen by a robber. It was Feng Ling who passed by and helped snatch the bag back. Just like that, we met for the first time." Qin Qiu briefly told him what had happened, and then said, "When I first found out that her surname was Feng, I didn't think much about it. Later, when I guessed that she might be my daughter, I remembered the small jade pendant she had been wearing since she was born. There was a Feng character engraved on it. I guess someone made her use this surname because of her jade pendant." The more Grandmother Feng listened, the more agitated she became. Even though it was already dark outside, she still turned her head to look out. As she looked, she held her old man's hand tightly. "Old man, let's go see her. Let's go bring our little granddaughter back." Hearing that they were going to bring her back now, Feng Mingzhu glared at them angrily. "Bring her back? Are you sure you want to bring her back? We don't even know if she wants to return to the Feng family. You're going to pick her up just like this?" Sensing Feng Mingzhu's anger, the two elders of the Feng family looked at her again. Grandfather Feng looked at her. "Mingzhu, what are you angry about? That's your sister, your biological sister. When you were young, you heard that your little sister fell into the sea. At that time, didn't you cry? Don't you remember that when you were young, you often kissed her in swaddling clothes? We're of the same blood." "Why?" Feng Mingzhu sneered. "If you were me, would you be happy?" Grandfather Feng paused and looked at her. After all, she was his granddaughter. No matter how many unreasonable things she had done, he would never think of her from a dark angle. He didn't think about how sensitive she was at this moment. He just looked at her and couldn't understand why she looked so determined, as if she would sever ties with the Feng family as long as they dared to bring Feng Ling back. "Enough. Do you still want the whole family to see your dark thoughts?" Qin Qiu suddenly scolded her and turned to glare at Feng Mingzhu. "Go back to your room and think about what you did wrong." "I was wrong." Feng Mingzhu's face was still red. She chuckled softly, but her voice was cold, and her voice was sharp and full of anger. "Mom, I wasn't the one who threw my child into the sea. You're the center of the Feng family. I'm not. Why should I be wrong? What did I do wrong?" Qin Qiu's face instantly turned pale because of her words. She looked at her eldest daughter in disbelief. "Bastard, what nonsense are you talking about?" Grandfather Feng suddenly said angrily. "Mingzhu, apologize to your mother." Feng Mingzhu didn't speak. She just looked at Qin Qiu's pale face, then at old Madame Feng, who couldn't hide her nervousness and excitement because of the news of her little granddaughter, and then at Grandfather Feng, who was glaring at her. Look, she just found out that her sister was not dead. She just found out that Feng Ling was still alive. Now, the whole family was on the verge of ganging up on her. If Feng Ling was really brought back one day, half of the Feng family's daughter's name would be given to her. Everything that belonged to her since she was young would be taken away by the person who should have died long ago. Perhaps they would compensate her more because of their guilt towards Feng Ling. Perhaps they would even ask her, as her sister, to give in to her and endure some grievances. In short, as long as Feng Ling was still alive in this world, it would be a devastating blow to her. "I asked you to apologize, but you're still glaring at me?" Grandfather Feng finally saw the seriousness of the matter from Feng Mingzhu's resentful expression. He suddenly narrowed his eyes and said, "Just now, your mother said that you already knew that these DNA and information were investigated by yourself. After knowing the results, you didn't tell anyone you didn't want your sister to come back?" Old Madame Feng also looked at her in disbelief. "Mingzhu, how could you bear to let your sister wander outside? Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't I say anything?" Feng Mingzhu opened her mouth, but she stood there quietly. Her eyes were a little empty, and her voice was flat and emotionless. Only a sneer could be seen on her lips, but also flashed past. "That's right. Why didn't I say what I was afraid of? Qin Xiu looked at her expression as if she had been hit. Although she was angry, she couldn't bear to see her trapped in that dilemma. She frowned and said, Mingzhu, you're no longer a child. You understand the logic very well. You've all grown up. Even if Feng Ling returns to the Feng family, no one will compete with you for the love of the elders. Besides, you know how the Feng family does things. Even if she comes back, the family won't be biased. You're still the apple of the Feng family's eye. Everything you want will still belong to you. Put down those knots in your heart. Whether she wants to come back or not, you have to get along well with her, okay? All right. Feng Mingzhu raised her chin slightly, the emotions in her eyes still unclear. If she really comes back, I will definitely get along well with her. Chapter 1250. Her tone didn't sound sincere, but now was not the time to argue with her. Qin Xiu looked at her for a while and could feel the anger and injustice hidden in her heart. She was about to say something when Grandfather Feng held the documents in his hand and said, Why is our little granddaughter in Li Nanheng's place? She's just a girl. How did she get into 11 base? Even he pointed at the documents in his hand. She's in a place like 11 base, yet she has such a thick pile of documents. A girl who ranks first in all kinds of assessments and is recognized as one of the strongest snipers in 11 base. What else? Drill master and champion. What exactly did she experience? When she first saw Feng Ling, Qin Xiu and her mother almost recognized her because of her appearance. But at that time, Feng Ling was still trying her best to pretend to be a man in order to survive. Qin Xiu looked at the documents in Grandfather Feng's hand. Her previous guess was now 100% confirmed. Her heart was in turmoil, and her voice was filled with suppressed heartache. She disguised as a man and mingled in 11 base to survive. I don't know what she experienced, but to be able to force a good girl to disguise as a man, it means that she must have had a bad life before entering 11 base. In the photo, Feng Ling looked very beautiful, but when she heard that she had a bad life before, Grandmother Feng's tears instantly fell. I'm going to bring her back now. Auntie Mai, quickly tidy up her room. Let's change everything into new ones. Buy everything that a girl likes and put it in. I want to bring her back and compensate her for all the things that I owe her for more than 20 years. My granddaughter has suffered too much. I must let her come back and enjoy the good life. Auntie Mai, quickly go and tidy up her room. Let's change everything into new ones. Buy everything that a girl likes and put it in. I want to bring her back and compensate her for all the things that I owe her for more than 20 years. My granddaughter has suffered too much. I must let her come back and enjoy a good life. All right, madam. I'll go right away. The old servant of the Feng family, Auntie Mai, nodded excitedly. I'll definitely prepare all the things that Second Miss might like since she was young. I'll let her feel the warmth of the family as soon as she comes back and let her believe that we really love her. Grandmother Feng couldn't stop her tears. She held her old man's hand. Old man, I can't take it anymore. I'm going to look for her now. Let's go together. Grandfather Feng nodded. He folded the documents in his hands neatly like treasures and handed them to another servant by the side. Then he turned to walk out with his wife. Seeing that they were about to bring her back, Feng Mingzhu bit her lip and stood behind the coffee table in silence. Qin Xiu also wanted to take Feng Ling back, but she remembered that Feng Ling seemed to have guessed something at that time, but she didn't say it out, and it seemed that she wasn't used to speaking in front of the elders. If the Feng family rashly went to 11 base to pick her up, not to mention that there were so many rules in 11 base, would they let her go easily? It was also unknown whether Feng Ling would be willing to go with them. Wait a moment. Qin Xiu stood up and said, Dad, Mom, it's too late now. Even if we want to bring her back, we need to have a detailed plan. This child has been away from us for almost 21 years. If a family suddenly runs to her and tells her that we are her grandparents and her parents, no one can adapt and accept it immediately. I think we'd better not scare her. Yes, that makes sense. Grandfather Feng also nodded and looked at the sky outside. It's indeed too late. What if my granddaughter is scared? But right now, we can't sleep at all. What's her phone number? Can you give her a call and let us hear her voice first? Qin Xiu shook her head. Feng Ling was a very cautious person, and she was used to keeping an appropriate distance from others. After meeting her a few times, she was not unfamiliar with her, but Feng Ling had never left her phone number. Even when Qin Xiu told her number to Feng Ling just sat there with a faint smile and did not have any intention of remembering it. She didn't want to remember it, nor did she want to have any private contact. Her personality was very alienated. It was impossible to know what this child had experienced when she was young, but looking at her cold personality, she could guess that it was definitely not a warm childhood experience. She was very defensive. Then call the hall of their base. I have the number of their base hall. After speaking, Grandfather Feng turned to make the call. Hearing this, everyone in the Feng family subconsciously followed. They all wanted to hear the voice of this second miss who had been dead for more than 20 years. Qin Xiu also stood up and walked over. She also wanted to see Feng Ling, and she also missed her. She was just afraid that the child would be too resistant, but she still thought about it in her heart. Seeing that everyone was surrounding the old man, they just wanted to listen to a phone call. That's all. Feng Mingzhu clenched her fists tightly by her sides and looked at them coldly. The call went through. Grandfather Feng first held his breath and then tried his best to remain calm and politely asked a few questions. After greeting Ah Feng, he gradually asked about Feng Ling. On the other side of the phone, Ah Feng didn't understand why the Feng family's grandfather would ask about Feng Ling. Of course, he wouldn't say anything to an outsider. He simply said, Feng Ling is not in the base recently. Hearing this, Grandmother Feng immediately became nervous and asked softly, My granddaughter is not here? Even though she had lowered her voice, Ah Feng still heard her clearly. Granddaughter, the Feng family's granddaughter? Who was Feng Ling? In an instant, some things that Ah Feng had not been able to understand completely connected in his mind. Boss Li and Feng Ling? So that was what was going on. Feng Ling claimed to be an orphan, and her background was indeed clean. No one knew that Boss Li married a cenotaph. It was only recently that they heard some rumors that the Feng family actually had a second daughter. Could that child be Feng Ling? Hearing the conversation of the Feng family on the other side of the phone, Ah Feng could basically confirm the relationship. Although he didn't know where Feng Ling was, from the location displayed on Boss Li's phone, this should be near Malibu Beach. It was a wild jungle nearby, and very few people went there. However, Boss Li had stayed there for a long time, which was enough to prove that Feng Ling was there. Chapter 1251. The jungle outside the cabin was already winter. Even though it was not covered with snow, it was still cold. Inside the wooden house, it was as warm as spring. There was a fire in the clean stove, and there was a safe makeshift stove by the window. The stove was covered with barbed wire, and it was very clean. Half a piece of bacon that hadn't been eaten in the afternoon was hanging on top of the barbed wire, and it was slowly being smoked and warmed up. It could be eaten anytime and anywhere. However, the room was not quiet at this moment. A few birds were waiting to be fed in the temporary bird nest by the bed. They stretched out their necks and opened their mouths wide, waiting to be fed. Feng Ling picked up earthworms with tweezers and fed them into their mouths. From time to time, she smiled and teased these birds with big mouths. Speaking of these birds, she also wanted to laugh. Originally, she was just going to dig out the eggs out of habit and bring them back to make a meal. However, perhaps because it was winter and the mother bird had flown off somewhere, the nest fell under the tree. She saw it and picked it up, but she didn't want to eat it that night. She didn't know how she happened to cover the nest with a thick coat, and it was in a warm place near the stove. On the third night, when she remembered the eggs and was about to come back to get them, she found that the top of a few of the eggs had cracked. Then, she watched helplessly as the first bird struggled out of the cracked egg. Then, one after another, she had harvested a nest of starving little birds. At that time, Li Nanheng had just returned from outside. He saw Feng Ling squatting by the bird nest by the bed and didn't know what to do. He thought something had happened to her, but when he walked over, he saw these little things in front of her. What are you? Hearing the man's words, Feng Ling raised her head to look at him in a daze. She then pointed to the few little things in front of her and said, I originally wanted to make some egg drop soup tonight, but I didn't expect these little birds to hatch from our clothes. Li Nanheng looked at the two thick clothes next to him and then at the remaining eggs that were gradually cracking at this time. Looking at the little things that kept crying out with their mouths wide open, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Do you want to raise them? Li Nanheng asked with a smile. I want to eat. Feng Ling's expression was very sincere. Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows. Eat them? I want to eat bird eggs. The weather has been cold recently. These eggs are not as easy to find as in the summer. Feng Ling's expression was blank and melancholy. But a bird actually hatched. What should I do? Li Nanheng chuckled. He knew that Feng Ling was straightforward. If she said she wanted to eat, she really wanted to eat. However, these birds were too small. Even if she wanted to make some bird meat soup, it was not possible, so he could only smile and say, "Do as you see fit." Feng Ling squatted in front of the birds for a long time. In the end, she saw that they wanted to eat something. Coincidentally, there were many earthworms she had just dug out in the room. She didn't know what birds ate, but she heard that they ate worms. Earthworms should be able to do the same, right? So she tried to feed it, and she didn't expect it to work. So she fed them continuously for about a week, and also raised these birds for a whole week. Li Nanheng came in and saw that she was feeding the birds. He walked over and gently kicked the nest she had specially made with some old cloth. Of course, he only touched it lightly, and Feng Ling quickly raised her hand to slap him away. Don't touch them. Li Nanheng smiled. I think they have grown up a lot in the past few days. They could be cooked into soup. Feng Ling's expression froze. She looked at him abruptly, only to see that the man was standing there condescendingly with a malicious smile. The corner of her mouth twitched, and she hurriedly bent down to carry the nest of birds to the bed like she was protecting her cubs. She used her body to block the nest as she said, I've been raising them for a week. If you dare to eat them, I won't let you off. Not only did Li Nanheng not walk away, but he even leaned closer. While she was squatting by the bed, he leaned down and trapped her by the bed. He lowered his head and kissed her on the cheek. How do you want to be with me? Feng Ling quickly pushed him with her hand. Don't mess around. Don't press them down. They are still young, and their feathers haven't fully grown. I'm warning you, don't have any ideas about them. If you want to eat them, go eat something else. I'll raise these few like this, you. Before she could finish speaking, the man bent down to hug her and kissed her hard. They had been together like this every day for half a year, but Li Nanheng's passion for her did not decrease. In fact, it was as though he loved her more and more every day. His passion had never decreased. Feng Ling had long gotten used to his habit of wanting to kiss her, touch her, and press her down on the bed. After being kissed for a while, the man finally let go of her, touched her shoulder-length hair, and kissed her in the hair. He then hugged her and smiled. Feng Ling didn't know what this man was smiling about, but she instinctively felt that he was definitely thinking of something bad. Of course, she didn't expect that Li Nanheng was considering whether they should have a child because he saw her protecting the birds. Feng Ling was not used to dealing with things with women, but in fact, she was still a woman in her bones. This kind of instinct was innate. The birds that she fed for a week were treated as treasures by her. If one day she really gave birth to a child that belonged to them, just thinking about it was enough to look forward to it. Although she couldn't eat the bird meat soup, there was bacon for dinner. Feng Ling carefully cut the meat into thin slices and made 2 simple vegetarian dishes. Life in the jungle was not particularly simple because of Li Nanheng's existence. It could even be said to be extravagant. When Feng Ling was young, she made a living in the jungle, but Li Nanheng had been the base for so many years, and his ability to survive in the wild was not much worse than hers. Many of the game was brought back by him, and it was especially rich. Every day, he did not lack food or clothes. At dinner, Feng Ling originally wanted to pick up a piece of bacon to eat, but for some reason, she suddenly felt nauseous. She abruptly put down her chopsticks and turned to the table to retch. What's wrong? It's nothing. My stomach doesn't feel well. Feng Ling did not vomit anything for a long time. She took a sip of the warm water Li Nanheng handed her, took a deep breath, and picked up 2 vegetarian dishes with her chopsticks. She no longer ate meat. Li Nanheng looked at her and suddenly said, Got it? Feng Ling didn't react at first. Half a minute later, when she understood what he meant, she almost dropped the bowl in her hand. How is that possible? Li Nanheng calmly smiled. Although I'm very careful every time, no contraceptive measure can guarantee a 100% success rate. Feng Ling, asking for monthly votes. Chapter 12:52. You can't guarantee it 100%. Of course, Feng Ling didn't understand this. But even if Li Nanheng didn't bring any condoms when he came here, he would pay attention to it every time they ended in bed. Before she was completely ready, before she really married into the Li family, he wouldn't let her get pregnant easily. He wouldn't let her fall into a dilemma or be forced into a situation. I've been here for almost half a year. Li Nanheng didn't say much. Just this sentence, coupled with his meaningful gaze, was enough for her to understand what he meant. In this kind of place, the nightlife was not as rich as it was outside. There were not as many entertainment methods and activities. After the sky turned dark, they chatted for a while after eating. They casually took the round pebbles that Li Nanheng had polished with tools as chess pieces and played with them on the ground for a while. Not long after, the two of them lay down and prepared to sleep. What did she do when she couldn't sleep? Of course, every night when she couldn't sleep, he would press her down on the bed and bully her. This man seemed to have an endless amount of energy, and it was always not enough. Unless she was on her monthly period or was really too tired, he really didn't rest at all. He did it at such a high frequency, and now he said that he couldn't guarantee a 100% success rate, which meant that she might really be pregnant. Otherwise, why would she suddenly feel disgusted? Feng Ling didn't know what counted as pregnancy, but according to what she had seen of Jinwan, it seemed that she often felt inexplicably disgusted and couldn't eat food that was too oily or too meaty. Thinking about her state just now, wasn't it about the same? Seeing the confusion and helplessness in her eyes, Li Nanheng put down the cutlery. Let's go to the hospital tomorrow. Feng Ling was startled and returned to look at him. Both of them knew that she had been in the base for 10 months. In the past 10 months, she had never left the jungle. There were only a few times when she needed to buy some necessities. Li Nanheng had taken advantage of the time when he was contacting the base to go outside the jungle to find his car parked in a secluded parking lot, drive to the city, buy some things, and then continue to accompany her here. Malibu Beach was a scenic area that had been open to the public. However, not many people would approach the area near the jungle. After all, it was rumored that there were all kinds of ferocious beasts in the jungle. In fact, it was just that the local tourism bureau did not want this large natural jungle to be destroyed and disturbed by tourists. However, not far from here, there were many institutions, parking lots, large supermarkets, hospitals, and many hotels with sea views. Li Nanheng's car was parked nearby. If they really left the jungle, everything would be very convenient. Feng Ling had originally planned to leave after the winter was over. She didn't think too much about whether she should go out to find a hospital right now. What really made her a little nervous was, what if there really is, if you have one, get married and give birth immediately? The man's words were very smooth. Feng Ling's voice faltered and she stared at him. What? You don't want to give birth? You're not ready yet? Li Nanheng raised his brows, his tone patient. No. Feng Ling looked at him and said, I've just never experienced such a thing. I don't know what to do. Other than going to the hospital for a checkup, what else do I have to do? Li Nanheng smiled. His voice was deep and carried a hint of a smile. You speak as if I've experienced it before. Go to the hospital for a checkup first, and then listen to the doctor? After all, if she was really pregnant, it would not be a joke. Feng Ling nodded and ate a few more mouthfuls before cleaning up the dishes. Seeing that she was eager to end the day and sleep as soon as possible, as though she could go to the hospital for a checkup tomorrow morning, Li Nanheng smiled at her. Don't be too nervous. No, I'm not nervous. Feng Ling placed the bowl and chopsticks in the water and was about to wash them. However, at this moment, the man behind her walked over and took her hand out of the water. He naturally took over the work of washing the dishes and comforted her as he washed. I'm usually so careful. Although it's now 100% successful, I think the chances of being pregnant shouldn't be very high. If you're not pregnant, our original plan won't be disrupted. If you're really pregnant, if you're not prepared to be a mother, you can give birth and throw it to the Li family. The four elders of the Lee family will definitely take turns to take care of the child. There's no need to worry. Feng Ling originally didn't think so much. Hearing his words, she immediately replied, "Throw it to the Lee family? You want to use the word throw on your own child?" Li Nanheng's lips curved up. As he washed, he looked back and pecked her lips. "You haven't confirmed whether you're pregnant or not, and you're already starting to protect your child? Are you going to argue with me over a single word?" Realizing that she had been teased by him, Feng Ling glared at him and ignored him. She turned to sit back on the bed and looked at her stomach from time to time. "So if you're really pregnant, do you plan to take care of the child yourself in the future?" Li Nanheng washed the dishes and turned to help her boil the bath water. Now that the weather was cold, they couldn't go to the stream to wash. There was a large water bucket in the room that Li Nanheng had built. 2 buckets a day were enough for the two of them to cook, wash things, and boil water for bathing at night. However, it was a little troublesome to fetch water back every day. Of course, Li Nanheng snatched away the hard work. "I've never thought about it." As Feng Ling spoke, she subconsciously placed her hand on her stomach. She recalled that when Jin Wan was pregnant, she would subconsciously protect her stomach. So this was how it felt. She didn't know if she was pregnant or not, but she already had this kind of consciousness. So, when Jin Wan woke up in the hospital and found that her child was gone, how did she survive those months, especially when Mr. Mo hadn't woken up yet? How painful and sad must she have been? I didn't think about it before, but now I can think about it seriously. When Li Nanheng walked past the bed, he pinched her chin and continued to get the water. After a few months, this young master of the Li family had already gotten used to loving her, taking care of her, and trying to make her do as little as possible. He rushed to do everything that he could do, causing Feng Ling to get used to being taken care of by him. She didn't even need to prepare the bath water herself. When Li Nanheng prepared the water and gestured for her to go take a shower, Feng Ling lowered her head to observe her flat stomach as she bathed. What did it feel like to be a mother? She suddenly recalled that time in the coffee shop. Qin Xiu had sat in front of her and kept staring at her face. That kind of careful, warm gaze, but she didn't dare to approach. Chapter 1253. After living in the jungle for these months, Feng Ling had figured out many things. In fact, there was indeed no fault. Back then, her parents had accidentally left her in the sea. In the vast sea late at night, even the crew on the cruise ship couldn't find her. Could it be that her parents had to jump into the sea in exchange for her life? The Feng family had never forgotten her. They were not cold-blooded. They even cherished the memory of her dead and had always kept her in their hearts. Although when she recalled her childhood experience, she felt that it was really a miracle to be able to walk out of the jungle alive and enter 11 Base alive to change her life. But after all, she was a miracle itself. This was something she should be thankful for. Besides, she had never lacked the love of her family, and there was a man like Li Nanheng by her side. She was actually very satisfied. There was nothing to hate. All she had was contentment. So if she really left the jungle, she might find time to see Qin Xiu. Of course, she wouldn't go to the Feng family, but Qin Xiu was her mother after all. Between mother and daughter, they should have a face-to-face conversation. After all, she had given birth to and raised her. At least, she could tell that Qin Xiu really respected her. Such a mother shouldn't be left out. At least, she should be given a sense of security. After all, for so many years, the person who suffered the most must be Qin Xiu. Seeing her alone and calling her mom should make Qin Xiu very happy, right? Thinking of this, Feng Ling's heart warmed up. The next day, Feng Ling woke up very early and went to prepare breakfast as usual. She slept early last night. Although she woke up early today, she was very energetic. After all, last night, Li Nanheng was worried about her body. If she was really pregnant, he definitely couldn't touch her easily. Last night, the man tossed and turned on the bed. In the end, he hugged her to sleep. After falling asleep, his hands were still restless and insisted on holding her firmly in his arms. After making sure that she was always his, he gradually fell asleep. Feng Ling woke up early, and Li Nanheng also woke up. The man lay on the bed, tilting his head to watch her back and forth preparing breakfast. He supported his head with one hand and stared at her for a long time, a smile on his lips. Sensing that the man had woken up and was watching her, Feng Ling placed the breakfast on the stove to heat it up and turned back to look at him. "Why are you looking at me?" "I'm thinking, although there are too many responsibilities in life, we can't stay in this kind of place for the rest of our lives. But when we get old, maybe we can come back to live here. At that time, I'll build a house for you. I'll have experience building another house. How about building a 2-story house?" Feng Ling chuckled and poked the flame in the stove with a small wooden stick. After watching the fire burn brighter, she gently shook the small wooden stick in her hand. "If I'm really old, I won't be able to move easily. I can't even carry water. How can I live here? TSK, when the time comes, we'll prepare some water pipes from outside and extend them to the clear stream. We'll think of a way to direct the water over. Or if it really doesn't work, we'll drill a well near the house. As long as we can still breathe, we can do anything. What's there to worry about?" The man sneered. Originally, Feng Ling wanted to mock him for saying it was easy. It wasn't easy to connect a water pipe in such a place, but it wasn't impossible to drill a well. This place was close to the sea, and there was fresh water. It shouldn't be too deep to have water. She didn't say anything more. She just thought that if she could really come back in the future, it would indeed be quite exciting. In the past, she only felt that this place was very secluded and had too many things to do with her childhood. But now, the meaning of this jungle to her had long changed. Everything was because of Li Nanheng. Li Nanheng. It was really a name that changed her life. Feng Ling didn't realize that she was sitting by the stove and writing these words on the solid, muddy ground with a small wooden stick. "What are you writing?" The man's voice suddenly appeared behind her. She suddenly shivered and subconsciously used her feet to cover the 3 slightly obvious words on the ground. She didn't notice when he got off the bed and walked over. Li Nanheng had long seen it. He bent down behind her and whispered in her ear with a low smile, "Why didn't I know that you love me so much? Sitting here early in the morning, you're so bored that you're writing my name on the ground to pass the time?" The wooden stick in her hand had been in the stove for a while, and there was a piece of semi-hard charcoal at the front. When she wrote on the ground, it would leave a black mark. Earlier, she had repeatedly written and traced here, making the originally unclear words clear. Li Nanheng's eyes were fine, so how could he not see it? At this moment, Feng Ling simply stepped on it with both feet and silently hid her deep love under her feet. Li Nanheng laughed out loud because of her feminine side. Hearing his laughter, Feng Ling abruptly stood up and made a move. The man dodged in time. After a while, the two of them were playing on the bed. Feng Ling was out of breath from his kiss, and the fragrance of breakfast wafted in the air. Only then did they finally stop. Before leaving the jungle, Feng Ling extinguished the fire in the stove. After living here for so long, she usually paid the most attention to fire prevention. After all, in a place like the jungle, what she was most afraid of was fire. There were flammable flowers and trees all around, especially now that it was winter and the air was dry. If she wasn't careful, it might cause a forest fire. Even if she only went to the hospital for a checkup and would be back in a few hours, she still paid attention to this. When she first came out, Feng Ling did not feel uncomfortable because she had been inside for 10 months. However, Li Nanheng's car was parked in front of the Malibu Beach scenic area. It was a little cold in this season, and there were very few tourists. There were only a few people nearby. Feng Ling looked at those people and then at the sea not far away. "Is there anything you're not used to?" After getting into the car, Li Nanheng helped her buckle her seatbelt. At the same time, he circled her in the passenger seat and looked at her with concern. "Do you want to go straight to the hospital or find a place to sit for a while?" He considered that it had been a long time since she had seen other people. He didn't know if her interpersonal skills would be affected. After all, in the past, Feng Ling had always been very cautious in dealing with people and was not very open-minded. I'm fine. Let's go straight to the hospital." Feng Ling blinked at him. "I'm not that 5-year-old little girl who just walked out of it. I'm already used to it." Li Nanheng smiled, rubbed her head, and started the engine. Chapter 1254. the nearest international hospital to Malibu Beach in Los Angeles. Feng Ling went to have her blood tested and did several other tests. In the end, she confirmed that it was indeed just an upset stomach. The doctor asked her if she had eaten something cold a few days ago. Feng Ling recalled that the bacon she had eaten in the past few days might not be easy to digest, and because there was too much meat, she was afraid that it would go bad after a long time. She didn't want to waste food, so she ate more than usual and ate several meals in a row, causing food accumulation. Furthermore, when she drank water, she often drank cold water when Li Nanheng wasn't paying attention. If there was no hot water, she would drink cold water. This might have caused a burden on her stomach. That was why she suddenly experienced nausea, vomiting, and loss of appetite. Right now, she felt disgusted when she saw bacon because she had eaten too much these past few days. After confirming that she was not pregnant, although Li Nanheng knew that he was usually very careful and that the possibility of pregnancy was not high, he still held the test report with a look of disappointment. In fact, he should be more careless occasionally. Perhaps in a few months, his child would be born. When did he, Li Nanheng, become so obedient? He actually restrained himself every time to prevent her from getting pregnant. What are you disappointed about? Feng Ling snatched the test report from his hand. It's not time yet. Tisk, how can I not be disappointed? Li Nanheng hugged his little wife and walked towards the hospital parking lot. If I'm really pregnant now, can I go back and get married immediately? The sooner I marry into the Li family, when I return to the base, I won't just be little Feng Ling in the eyes of those grandsons. She'll be Mrs. Li, my wife. As the man spoke, he leaned down to her ear. Why don't we go back tonight and make a baby? Feng Ling originally thought that she was really pregnant last night, but now she knew that it was just a misunderstanding. It was just an upset stomach. She couldn't tell if she was relaxed or a little regretful like him. Their relationship was so good. In fact, if they really had children, it would be good. Anyway, as he said, if she had time to take care of the children, she could learn to be a mother. If she really didn't have time, the elders of the Li family could help them take care of the children. This was indeed a happy thing. Hearing that he wanted to make a baby, she did not say anything. She did not object or agree. Seeing that she clearly did not completely reject him, Li Nanheng's eyes lit up. He wished he could bring her back to the car and make a baby in the car. However, after being kissed by him for a while in the car, Feng Ling suddenly said, since it's rare for you to come out, buy some blankets and coats nearby. After all, you have to stay here for the entire winter. Buy a duvet. It's light and comfortable. Sure. Li Nanheng's mind was filled with thoughts of going home to make a baby. It was even better to change to a more comfortable quilt. Without hesitation, he agreed and hugged her to nibble on it. When Feng Ling raised her hand to push his face, he smiled and drove to the nearby shopping mall. After all, this was a scenic spot. There was no lack of anything. The shopping mall was also very close. It had been a long time since Feng Ling had visited such a place. After buying the duvet, she strolled around for a while and bought some other daily necessities. She also bought a particularly beautiful shell wind chime that was commonly seen in this kind of scenic spot with the sea. Feng Ling and wind chime had the same sound. She instinctively liked this thing and bought it. She wanted to hang it in front of the window of the cabin as a decoration. Of course, there was no lack of delicacies from all over the world in this kind of scenic spot. There was a hot pot place on the top floor of the shopping mall. Although the taste was not as authentic as the last time, the soup base was light and the ingredients were enough to satisfy one's cravings. Furthermore, it was not very stimulating to the stomach. After buying a lot of things and eating their fill, they prepared to go back. The two of them had just placed the things they had bought into the trunk of the car and were tidying up the things in the back of the car when they suddenly heard some tourists nearby speaking different languages and pointing in a certain direction. Their words were filled with surprise and bewilderment. Li Nanheng seemed to understand a certain Korean or Japanese language spoken by the people closest to him. His hand that was putting the things into the car suddenly paused, and he abruptly turned to look in the direction those people were pointing at. In the distance, the sea was calm, and about 10 kilometers away, in the direction of the jungle where he had accompanied Feng Ling for half a year, there was billowing smoke in the sky. The smell had even gradually drifted to this position, and the air was filled with the smell of burning fire. At this moment, Fengling also abruptly turned to look in that direction. Her clear eyes reflected the thick black smoke, and her brows instantly twitched. She abruptly turned to look at Li Nanheng. Without saying anything, the two of them decisively closed the trunk, quickly got into the car, and drove back. The closer they got to the jungle, the more they could feel the burning sensation in the air. When they could clearly see the flames, Li Nanheng frowned. He didn't need to look at Fengling's eyes to know her current mood. The flames had already covered the entire jungle. It was early winter, and the air was dry. The trees in the jungle had already turned yellow. As long as there was a little fire source, with the help of the wind, it was enough to make the fire spread very quickly. When they drove the car to a place only a few hundred meters away from the flames, the sea of flames had almost engulfed the entire jungle. He didn't have time to think about their home, their house, and everything they had left in the jungle. Li Nanheng only heard the sound of many fire engines approaching. At the same time, he saw the black MPV parked not far away. When he saw the old couple standing by the car and excitedly wanting to rush into the sea of fire, his brows suddenly twitched. The two elders of the Feng family? Fengling stared at the sea of flames and followed Li Nanheng's gaze blankly to the two old men who were rushing in the direction of the sea of flames. Her voice was slightly hoarse. Who are they? Grandfather Feng and Grandmother Feng. When Li Nanheng said these words, he seemed to have thought of something. He subconsciously gripped the steering wheel tightly and drove the car over. When the car stopped by the two elders, she had just opened the door when she suddenly heard Grandmother Feng's desperate and pained cry. What should we do? What should we do? They're all inside. They're inside. How can there be such a big fire? What should we do? Inside. Who is inside? Li Nanheng got out of the car, and Fengling quickly followed him out. When she followed him to the two elders of the Feng family, the two agitated old men suddenly turned their eyes. When they recognized Li Nanheng, they abruptly turned their heads and met Fengling's eyes. Chapter 1255. The moment their eyes met, the two old men looked into Fengling's eyes and were both startled. Grandmother Feng looked at her with tears in her eyes. She raised her hand tremblingly, but as she looked at her, she anxiously reached out in the direction of the burning jungle. This child, this elders, this is... Li Nanheng sensed the seriousness of the matter from the two elders' eyes and frowned. What happened? Grandfather Feng's gaze also fell on Fengling, but he didn't have time to say anything. The moment he saw Li Nanheng, he raised his old hand and pointed in the direction of the fire. They're inside. They want to look for you. Quick, think of a way to save them. Li Nanheng's brows twitched. Who are they? At this moment, Grandmother Feng suddenly burst into tears. She quickly stepped forward and hugged Fengling, who was still standing by the side in a daze. As she hugged her, she buried her face in front of her and cried loudly. My granddaughter! You're my granddaughter! Fengling, my good granddaughter! Grandma finally saw you. But what should we do now? Your parents went in just now. They thought you were in the jungle and were afraid that our legs wouldn't be good. So they said they would go in to look for you first, but why did it suddenly catch fire? What should we do now? Old Madame Feng cried and sobbed. As she cried, Li Nanheng could roughly understand what was going on. Suddenly learning that Qin Xiu and Mr. Feng were in the jungle, Li Nanheng's eyes darkened. He glanced at Fengling, who was still standing there. She didn't know where to put her hands and feet when she saw the old woman suddenly pouncing on her and crying uncontrollably. However, the moment she heard that her biological parents were in the burning jungle, all her hair stood on end. The moment Li Nanheng turned to look at her, she abruptly turned to look at him. Their eyes met. They were used to being in 11 base, so they didn't have anything else to say. The most important thing right now was to save them. How did they get in with such a big fire? Li Nanheng said as he quickly observed the fire above the jungle. Hearing the sound of the fire engines approaching, he turned back to look in the direction of the fire engines and decisively walked toward them. Fengling thought that Qin Xiu was inside. That was her mother and her father whom she had never seen before. The habit of every rescue mission and the faint consciousness in her heart reminded her to immediately go to the fire engine with Li Nanheng to apply for the rescue. However, the old woman who was crying so hard that she almost fainted made her unable to retreat. Her hands were stiff by her sides. Listening to the old woman's pained and anxious cries, Feng Ling lowered her head to look at her. Her lips moved, but she didn't know what to say or what to say. At the critical moment of life and death, no one could spare the extra thought to consider what kind of background or how to address them. She paused for a moment and looked up at the old man who was walking over. "Old Mr. Feng, I'm sorry, but I have to participate in the rescue now. Let's save them first, okay?" Elder Feng looked at her deeply and tried his best to suppress his anxiety. He nodded at her and said, "How are you going to save such a big fire? Child, don't take the risk. Your parents are in danger now. If you go in and something happens to them, I'm a member of 11 Base. I have professional rescue methods. I participated in countless dangerous missions. Please trust us." With that, Feng Ling pushed the crying old woman in her arms to Elder Feng. At the same time, she quickly turned and ran in the direction of the fire engine. Grandfather Feng held his wife's hand tightly and looked back at the burning jungle worriedly. The weather was too dry, and the fire was getting bigger and bigger. It was easier said than done to save people in such a large jungle. On the one hand, he was filled with worry, and on the other hand, he was happy to finally see Feng Ling. The two feelings collided. The two old men couldn't bear it and staggered by the car door. "Please be all right. Please." Grandmother Feng clutched her chest, her eyes red. From time to time, she looked at the flames in the sky and then turned to look in the direction Feng Ling had just left. As she looked, she said in a trembling voice, "Old man, that's our granddaughter. Yes, she's our granddaughter." Grandfather Feng sighed. "With just a glance, I can tell that she's an outstanding and brave child." Several fire engines were already in place. Li Nanheng used his phone to contact the nearest rescue helicopter of 11 Base. It would fly over in about half an hour. Because they were really members of 11 Base, the rescue team had to take out spare fireproof suits, disinfectant masks, and other equipment in the car at their request. Li Nanheng communicated with the people in the fire truck in English the whole time. Feng Ling listened and quickly changed her clothes. Although she was silent and did not step forward to speak, although she looked calm, her trembling hands still exposed the worry and fear under her emotions. It was really too difficult to save the two of them in such a big fire. But the people there were her parents, and the two kind old men just now were her grandparents. They were all family members that she had never dared to hope for. Why did the fire suddenly break out? Why did they suddenly come here? Why did they go in? How could this be? After Li Nanheng communicated with the people inside, he turned back and saw Feng Ling fastening her belt with trembling hands. His gaze fell on her face. At this time, any words of concern were useless. He only looked at her and asked in a serious and low voice, "Can you do it?" Feng Ling did not answer. Instead, she decisively picked up the gas mask and put it on her head as an answer. The fire in the jungle was very big. Although Li Nanheng didn't want Feng Ling to take the risk, she had been on many rescue missions, and they were more dangerous than this. Right now, the people inside were her parents, and she couldn't be left outside. She had to go with them. "After you go in, listen to my commands. No matter what happens, no matter what situation you see, don't be emotional." Li Nanheng warned in a low voice that only she could hear. Feng Ling had already put on the gas mask and looked up at him. Okay. The sky was dyed red by the flames, and the scorching heat came from the direction of the jungle, making her eyelids hurt. No one would have thought that the forest would be engulfed by a sea of fire just a moment ago, when they were still planning to return to the forest and change into a feather quilt to stay for another winter. Chapter 1256. The sudden impact on Li Nanheng was not small, let alone Feng Ling, who had a special feeling for this jungle. However, the people in danger were her parents who gave birth to her. She didn't even have the time to feel sad or regretful. She had to participate in the rescue. She couldn't even have the time to feel uneasy or confused. Li Nanheng looked at her for 2 more seconds and suddenly said sternly, "Feng Ling, listen up." Feng Ling, whose back was slightly sagging, subconsciously straightened her body and stood in front of him with her legs closed. "Yes. From now on, follow behind me. You're not allowed to rush forward alone. You're not allowed to be more than a meter away from me. Even if the home you built with your own hands is destroyed, you have to remember what's more important. If the home is gone, you can build it again. Your life is the most important, understand?" Feng Ling's expression did not change. Her hands slowly clenched into fists in the sleeves of her heat-resistant suit. Although she only answered with one word, her voice was still hoarse. "Yes." At the same time, the two elders of the Feng family were quickly invited over by the firefighters to ask what had happened. As the people in the car were all wearing the same clothes and the same disinfectant mask, their faces could not be seen. The only thing the two elders could recognize was Feng Ling, who was slightly shorter and thinner than those men. When she answered all the questions, she stared at her and said with red eyes, "My son and daughter-in-law are here to look for their long-lost child." As she spoke, the old lady looked at Feng Ling's mask and stared at her. "We all thought that the child had been inside and wanted to pick her up and let her go home, but the jungle was too big. They didn't come out for more than 2 hours, and there was no signal on the phone. Then, for some reason, a fire suddenly broke out. The wind was too strong, and the fire spread very quickly. My old man and I were afraid that something would happen, so we quickly called the police. It didn't take long for the fire engine to arrive, but the fire was already terrifyingly big. After learning the general cause and effect, the fire brigade arranged for all the rescue and fire prevention equipment. If it was just a forest fire, there was no way to control the fire rationally. They could only wait for the fire to gradually become smaller and control the periphery to not be burned. After understanding the general cause and effect of the fire brigade immediately arranged for all rescue and fire prevention equipment. If it was just a forest fire, the fire could not be controlled rationally at all. They could only wait for the fire to gradually become smaller and control the periphery so that the fire would not spread to more places. But now that there were people in the jungle, they had no choice but to take the risk to rush in to save them. In such an endless jungle, they had no idea where the two of them were. In such a sea of fire, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack, and they were risking their lives to fish for it. Feng Ling jumped out of the fire truck with everyone. Old Madame Feng watched her figure with reddened eyes. Seeing that Feng Ling did not look back and decisively followed everyone forward, old Madame Feng suddenly called her, "Child." Feng Ling's footsteps paused, but she only paused for a moment before continuing. "Feng Ling." Madame Feng couldn't help but rush forward to grab her wrist. "Good child, do you know your background? Do you know what your relationship with the Feng family is? Listen, Grandma, don't go, okay? You've already suffered for too many years. Don't go." Feng Ling was silent for a moment before gently pulling her hand out of the old lady's grasp. She then turned back and said through the gas mask, "I'll save them. Please don't worry." With that, she left. "Ah, child, Feng Ling." Madame Feng was about to chase after her, but Feng Ling had already walked far away. Behind her, several members of the fire truck came forward to support Madame Feng, who was almost unable to stand steadily. They politely sent her and Grandfather Feng into the car and let them rest for the time being. Rest? Who could really rest? Grandfather Feng held his wife's hand tightly and looked at the sea of fire. He hated that he was too old. If time could turn back 30 or 40 years, they would definitely rush in to save him. They wouldn't be sitting here crying and being taken care of. There was nothing else they could do. In the end, Madame Feng could only close her eyes anxiously and pray to the heavens, to the Bodhisattva, and to the various gods. In the jungle, no one was more familiar with the environment than Feng Ling. The flames engulfed everything, and the flames and thick smoke also obscured the vision of the road ahead. Feng Ling followed the route in her memory. In addition, Li Nanheng had lived here for half a year, so he was already familiar with many directions and routes. The two of them carried rescue equipment and rushed in first. They stepped on the ground that was barely visible under the flames and leaned forward. The thick smoke was too heavy for them to speak, and the mask on their faces was not suitable for them to speak either. Li Nanheng searched around with the help of the flames. At the same time, his gaze fell on Feng Ling from time to time. He saw that she had been following obediently the entire time and was not too emotional because of worry, but he knew that this was when she was really worried and flustered. The more expressionless she was, the more emotional she was. She was afraid. She was not afraid that something would happen to her. She was afraid that her mother would really die here. This was the place where she could save her life when she was young. She had spent 5 years growing up here. If something happened to her parents here, how would she face all of this in the future? Li Nanheng lowered his head and glanced at the slightly soft mud. He saw 2 pairs of uneven footprints on it. Looking in the direction of the footprints, he pursed his thin lips coldly. Without saying a word, he reached out and pulled Feng Ling to his side. He pulled her forward and silently gave her the courage to persevere. Feng Ling's hand pressed against his hand and did not say anything. Feng Ling pressed her hand against his and did not say anything. She also saw the 2 footprints and guessed that they should be her parents. She immediately clenched her hand in his hand, but after a short while, the man forced her hand open and held it in his palm, preventing her from suppressing her emotions and stabbing herself with her nails. At the same time, he held her firmly and kept her by his side, not giving her any chance to take risks alone. Even if she died here, she had to die by Li Nanheng's side. The 2 of them bent down and continued to walk in, but the deeper they went, the more the smoke choked their eyes. Even though the gas and fire masks were very effective, they still inhaled some. The rescue operations that Feng Ling had participated in before were not as large as the jungle, and she could accurately know the target location. Chapter 12:57. Right now, they didn't even know where they were. How could they find a target location? In such a large jungle, they could hide in any corner, but in such a sea of fire, where could they hide? The 2 of them gradually separated from the firefighters and kept walking forward, because their home was there. The road in the middle of the jungle was particularly rugged. It was so rugged that even though they had walked it for half a year, they still felt scared when they stepped on it again. The sea of fire spread, and the choking smoke was nearby. A cluster of fire lifted her clothes. Although the fireproof suit would not burn, it was really hot. Can we still hold on? No matter how they walked in, they were still very far away from their usual living area. The fire was too big. It was not practical to walk in that direction with such a big fire. They would definitely die here before they reached their destination. Feng Ling nodded hastily and did not say much. Li Nanheng exerted a little force and forced Feng Ling to stop. At the same time, he turned around to block her. He lowered his head and saw that the little woman did not seem to realize that she had stopped. She was still walking forward mechanically. She only had to stop because she bumped into his arms. Focus. Don't think about unrelated things. The house can be built again. Let's change the route. They don't know where we built the house. Under normal circumstances, which direction will people go first when they enter the jungle for the first time? Which side looks more obvious? I remember there's a small path near that side. Li Nanheng pressed her into his arms, coaxing her while trying to distract her. Feng Ling came back to herself. She had come in to find Qin Xiu and the others. Of course, saving them was more important. However, after walking in and watching the jungle gradually being swallowed by the sea of fire, she subconsciously wanted to go back and take a look. She didn't know what the emotions in her heart were, but her trembling heart was because when she looked at the trees that were swallowed by the fire, she thought of the home she and Li Nanheng lived together, the home he helped her build bit by bit. She was very sad, but it was not the time to be sad. She braced herself and nodded, trying to sound as calm as possible. Yes, there's a high possibility that the road over there is the same. If they were Feng Ling's parents, and this was the first time they had come to a place like the jungle and learned that it was impossible to drive inside, but they also knew that Feng Ling seemed to live here, what would they do? Of course, after walking in, he would find the path that looked the most like a road. Then, he would continue to search for every place that looked beautiful and safe, connecting one safe direction after another. Li Nanheng decisively led Feng Ling there. He no longer hesitated or searched around randomly. He took the same path back and walked toward the route he had roughly guessed. In this thick smoke and terrifying sea of fire, he finally saw the unconscious Mr. Feng Yuancheng, under a tree. Finally, she saw someone. When Feng Ling saw the person who had fallen to the ground, she thought it was Qin Xiao. She endured the scorching heat and the sweat on her body and rushed over. In the end, she turned the person over and saw that it was a man. She had rushed over in a hurry and hadn't seen his silhouette clearly. When she saw that it was a man, she paused. At this moment, Li Nanheng walked over and whispered, "Since Mr. Feng is here, it means that Madame Feng should be nearby. The husband and wife should avoid the fire and walk around here. They won't be too far apart." Hearing that this person was Mr. Feng Ling composed herself and glanced at the middle-aged man who had fainted from the thick smoke on the ground. Li Nanheng stepped forward and helped the man up. He grabbed one of the man's hands and placed it on his shoulder, helping him to stand up. However, Mr. Feng had clearly fallen into a deep coma and was unconscious. He did not notice this little movement at all. He did not even have the slightest reaction. Li Nanheng knew very well that they were surrounded by trees. It was easy to ignite and produce a lot of thick smoke. He and Feng Ling, wearing heat-resistant suits and gas masks, were already very uncomfortable after coming in for less than 10 minutes. Not to mention how much smoke Mr. Feng and Madame Feng had inhaled. Usually, in a fire, the fire was not fatal. The smoke was the real source of death. After Feng Ling finally found one of them, her mental state improved slightly. However, because the smoke here was too thick, she did not have any hope of seeing if Madame Feng could make it out alive. Based on the situation here, any rational person would be able to guess that even if the two of them were brought out, there was almost no hope of them surviving. She quickly looked around. The thick smoke affected her vision. Feng Ling narrowed her eyes and walked a little faster. She continued forward until she saw Madame Feng, Qin Xiao, who had fallen under the tree about 10 meters away. Her heart pounded hard, and she quickly ran over to help Qin Xiao up. Madame Feng and Mr. Feng were in the same situation. They were unconscious. Time could not be delayed any longer. Feng Ling did not hesitate to carry Qin Xiao on her back. She supported her body with one hand and decisively took off the mask on her face with the other. She was about to put it on Qin Xiao's face. Li Nanheng turned back and saw her action. His cold brows furrowed. "Do you want to die?" Feng Ling did not answer. She just glanced at him and did not speak. She carried him on her back and walked out. Li Nanheng saw that she was feeling uncomfortable and guessed that nothing he said would make sense, so he did not stop her from doing such a stupid thing. Instead, he raised his hand to take off the mask on his face and walked over to put it on for her. When Feng Ling looked up at him and wanted to ask him what to do, she saw the anger in the man's eyes and was speechless. "Don't waste time. Let's go," Li Nanheng ordered coldly. He carried the middle-aged man who had been leaning weakly by his side and quickly carried him out with Feng Ling. They rushed out along the road under the sea of fire. From time to time, there was the sound of a tree being burned and falling. The journey that should have taken more than 10 minutes was completed in 5 minutes. They had been in there for so long that 11 Base's rescue helicopter had already arrived. Ignoring the objections of the firefighters, they were about to rush in to find them. A group of people was in a stalemate outside the jungle. Suddenly, they saw 2 people rushing out of the sea, each carrying a person. Seeing the 2 figures rushing out under the flames, the members of 11 Base were used to this kind of scene. They were the first to react and hurriedly went up to help. The firefighters looked at the 2 people who rushed out in shock and disbelief. Then they looked at the entire jungle that had been burned and felt incredulous. Chapter 1258. Feng Ling carried Qin Xiao on her back and ran out. The moment the rescue team of 11 Base rushed over, she saw that it was her own people. Her legs turned to jelly, and she staggered, almost kneeling on the ground. The rescue team members stepped forward to support her. Feng Ling. They hadn't seen each other for several months, but they didn't ask much. They just helped her up and quickly took the unconscious Qin over. The smoke inside is so heavy. Why did you and Boss take off the things on your heads? It's okay. Just now, Li Nanheng had put on for her, but she was in a hurry and didn't put on properly. She still inhaled some smoke. She gasped uncomfortably and glanced at them. Then she looked at Qin Xiu, who had been quickly helped into the helicopter. She turned around and saw that Mr. Feng had also been sent into the helicopter by Li Nanheng. The firefighters also rushed over to cooperate. After confirming that there was no one else in the jungle, they began to carry out the emergency rescue work. However, the fire was too big. It was not easy to put out the fire. This matter was not under the control of 11 Base. Right now, the most important thing was to save lives. After receiving Boss Li's instructions, the members of 11 Base directly brought the two elders in the fire truck to another helicopter and drove the helicopter to the hospital without delay. Feng Ling boarded Li Nanheng's helicopter. Mrs. Feng and Mr. Feng were unconscious in the helicopter. Their faces were in a mess. She didn't dare to check their breathing, but when she carried Qin Xiu out, she didn't seem to feel Qin Xiu's breath. It was so thick smoke. This kind of situation was not something that could be explained by external or internal injuries. In such a big fire, with such thick smoke, even a short 5 minutes was enough to be fatal. When she carried him out, she tried her best to adjust her breathing rate so that she would not choke on the smoke, but at this moment, she felt that her lungs were hurting terribly, and her throat felt like it was being pricked by countless needles. If it was just a bloody wound, everything would be fine. If they were pushed into the emergency room, there might be a good chance of survival. But in this situation, seeing the couple lying there silently and the base doctor opening their eyelids to check their condition, and seeing the base doctor frowning, her heart sank to the bottom. Her hand suddenly felt heavy. Li Nanheng had already taken off his heat insulation suit, sat beside her, and held her hand tightly and heavily. Don't worry. The man's throat was also a little hoarse, but it was clear that he was in a much better state than her. He looked at her with heartache and worry in his eyes, and the other half was because he had to take charge of the overall situation for her under such circumstances. Feng Ling didn't say anything. She didn't know how pale her face was right now. She had some gastrointestinal problems since last night. Although the nausea and vomiting were gone, the discomfort in her stomach still existed. After such a stimulation and torment, she felt as though her entire stomach had turned over. Looking at Qin Xiu and Mr. Feng lying there motionless and silent, her heart also turned over. It was as though her internal organs were hurting. However, in the end, she didn't say anything. She unzipped her heat insulation suit with one hand and let out a long breath. She took off the heat insulation suit that had completely wrapped around her and threw it to the side. Her shoulder-length hair was wet with sweat and stuck to her cheeks and neck. Her body was also covered in sweat. She didn't know if she saw wrongly or if there was an airflow, but the plane was a little bumpy. She seemed to vaguely see the base doctor shaking his head gently after the examination. His eyes were filled with helplessness. Feng Ling's gaze swept past the base doctor's face and then landed on the couple. Her hands were almost instantly cold. Li Nanheng held her tightly and raised his hand to hold her in his arms. They're all fine here. Don't worry, they'll be fine. If you feel uncomfortable, close your eyes for a while. When we arrive at the hospital, we'll send them to the emergency room immediately. Don't be afraid. Feng Ling closed her eyes and leaned into his arms. In the end, she allowed the discomfort and exhaustion to surround her. Her lips moved. Her voice was too hoarse and low. It's all my fault. Blame you for what? When Li Nanheng heard these words, he instantly frowned and gripped her shoulder tightly. Don't let your imagination run wild. What does this have to do with you? In fact, we should have left long ago. I was the one who couldn't bear to leave. There were clearly so many responsibilities waiting for us, but I hid in a secluded world and selfishly enjoyed so many stolen days. If I could go back earlier, perhaps they wouldn't come looking for me. Perhaps they wouldn't. Feng Ling, Li Nanheng held her firmly in his arms. You know very well that this kind of thing has nothing to do with you. Don't rush to take the blame when something happens. The cause of the fire is still unclear. It's still unclear what happened to Mr. Feng and Mrs. Feng after they entered the jungle. If you continue to be so negative, I'm afraid I'll bring you back to the base. I won't even let you go to the hospital. You won't be able to see the Feng family again." Feng Ling did not speak anymore. She just closed her eyes and leaned weakly in his arms. After a long time, just when Li Nanheng thought that she was so tired that she fell asleep in his arms, he suddenly heard a low sob. Feng Ling was crying. However, she was afraid that someone would find out that she was crying, so she could only hide in his arms, but she still couldn't help but make a little sound. Li Nanheng did not speak. He hugged her and gently stroked the back of her head as though he was coaxing an injured little beast. He lowered his head and kissed the hair on her head to comfort her. At the same time, he turned to look at the doctor. The doctor saw that Feng Ling did not look at them and turned to meet Li Nanheng's gaze. He sighed imperceptibly, and then gently he shook his head. There was nothing he could do. The cabin was very quiet, and no one spoke. If one listened carefully, they could only vaguely hear Feng Ling's low sobs, but she really tried her best to suppress it and hide her voice. Her face was buried in his arms, and her hands were also tightly gripping his clothes. Her fingers were still tightly clenched, and there was the sound of bones crisscrossing. In all these years, the number of times Feng Ling had cried could be counted with 5 fingers, not to mention in front of so many members of the base. Li Nanheng glanced at the couple again, and his eyes darkened. He abruptly picked up Feng Ling, who was sobbing softly in his arms, and carried her into the bathroom in the helicopter. Chapter 1259. In the bathroom on the helicopter, there were all the things and facilities. The space was not big, but it was very quiet. After closing the door, it could isolate all the gazes from the outside. He gave her a quiet space to cry and let her vent. However, after entering the bathroom, Feng Ling just stuck in his arms and refused to raise her head. Li Nanheng locked the bathroom door, pressed her against the door, lowered his eyes to look at her, and forced her chin up to stare at her red eyes. "Don't hide. If your heart is too uncomfortable, cry. After all, we've already rescued her, haven't we? The damage has been minimized, and the rest will be left to the doctor. You didn't do anything wrong. That jungle was the place where you lived when you were very, very young. You should be glad that your parents wanted to come here personally to take you back. They have seen the place where you lived when you were young. They really love you and miss you very much." Feng Ling could no longer hold back her tears. She raised her red eyes to look at him and suddenly burst into tears. She threw herself into the man's arms and sobbed hoarsely. "Li Nanheng, I'm afraid." From the first day she could remember, she stood in the jungle to survive, and then for so many years until today. This was the first time she said she was afraid. Li Nanheng hugged her and let her cry to her heart's content in the bathroom. In the end, when she was tired of crying and her stomach was uncomfortable, she leaned weakly in his arms and did not make a sound. After confirming that she had stopped crying, he opened the bathroom door and let her out. At this time, the helicopter had already flown over a large hospital that cooperated with 11 Base and was about to land. Feng Ling's eyes were already red from crying. The base members on the plane saw that she was actually crying. Recalling the scene where Feng Ling and Boss Li risked their lives to save her from the sea of fire, although they didn't know what relationship the Feng family had with them, their relationship shouldn't be simple. Considering that Feng Ling was also surnamed Feng, the base members didn't dare to ask more. However, after the plane landed, considering that the wind outside was too strong and Feng Ling's eyes were rarely so red, one of the members handed her a pair of sunglasses. "Thank you, I don't need it." Feng Ling didn't mind her eyes were red. "Put on. The wind is strong. You just cried, and your eyes can't stand the stimulation." Li Nanheng took it for her and put the sunglasses on for her. He really couldn't bear to see her crying. Earlier in the bathroom, his heart ached so much that he wanted to dig out his heart. Right now, there were still a lot of things waiting for them to deal with outside. There were also Mrs. Feng and Mr. Feng's lives waiting for emergency treatment. He needed to calm down and rationally deal with it, but as long as he saw her swollen eyes from crying, he was afraid he wouldn't be able to remain 100% calm. Feng Ling did not resist. She thought of the two elders of the Feng family in the other helicopter. At this time, they must be more worried. If they saw her crying like this, the two elders would probably not be able to control their emotions. The old man was old and could not take too much stimulation. The plane landed smoothly. The base members quickly sent Mr. Feng and Mrs. Feng to the hospital emergency center. Feng Ling got off the plane and was about to follow them when she suddenly heard the door of another plane that had just landed open. Someone was reminding the two elders of the Feng family to be careful not to fall. She stopped in her tracks and turned back to see the two elders. She saw that they were trembling and eager to get off the plane. Li Nanheng was going to the emergency center to dispatch people. There were many things he needed to do. He patted Feng Ling's shoulder. Go accompany the two elders first. Leave the rest to me. I'll investigate the cause of the fire as soon as possible. Be obedient and go. Feng Ling stood in place. Seeing that Li Nanheng had already entered the emergency center, she gently exhaled, then turned to the helicopter and went up to help. Grandfather Feng and Grandmother Feng were as anxious as ants on a hot pan. They were anxious to enter the emergency center to check on the situation. When she suddenly saw Feng Ling, Grandmother Feng's tears, which she had held back all the way, fell again. When Feng Ling reached out to support her, she quickly grabbed her hand tightly. Feng Ling, my good granddaughter. There was no need for a blood test or any other verification. When she saw her outside the jungle, she was sure that this was really that child, the pitiful child of the Feng family who had been lost in the vast ocean at the age of 1. She doted on her the most. Feng Ling's face was somewhat similar to Qin Xiu's, but her features were very similar to her father's. Her entire body was filled with the shadow of the Feng family. It couldn't be wrong. In the eyes of outsiders, she still looked cold and unapproachable. However, after her hand was tightly grabbed by the old lady, she did not move away. She only supported her and nodded at Grandfather Feng, who was walking over. She said softly to them, I've already sent him to the emergency room. I'll accompany you to the emergency center to find a restroom. Earlier, I choked on a lot of smoke and was tossed around all the way. Even young people can't take it, let alone you two. Go rest first. We'll be here. Don't worry. Grandfather Feng nodded and said softly, I've already sent him to the emergency room. Grandmother Feng cried and nodded. Child, you know who we are, don't you? You know where you're. Let's wait for news from the emergency room. Although Feng Ling knew that they were her family and that the people in front of her loved and missed her grandparents, now was not the time to acknowledge them. Besides, she didn't know how to deal with such feelings. She interrupted her softly. Her sunglasses covered all the true emotions in her eyes. She only called the members of the base and the helicopter to help her help the two elders of the Feng family in. Even though Feng Ling looked indifferent and unapproachable, at least she did not let go of Grandmother Feng's hand. When she sent them to the restroom, she said that she would pour them 2 glasses of water. Grandmother Feng could see that her entire body was tense. Even though she was reluctant, she still let go of her hand. Feng Ling asked someone to accompany them here. She then turned around and went out. She found 2 disposable cups to fill with warm water. When she returned with the water, she was still thinking about the jungle that had been swallowed by the sea of fire. The home she and Li Nanheng had built with their own hands would definitely not be able to return. Thankfully, all the memories were warm and happy. Thankfully, neither of them was injured. As he said, the home could be rebuilt if it was destroyed. Life was more important. So how did the fire start? She remembered that before she left, she had extinguished all the fire sources. She was afraid that it would cause a fire in the jungle. Fire prevention was very important. She had been very careful, so it was impossible for it to have spontaneously ignited from the inside. There must be some external factor. Chapter 1260. But what kind of external factors was it? There was no one nearby, and there were signs prohibiting tourists from approaching. She knew that there was no one to control the jungle and that it was not safe, so no one dared to go near it. It had caused such a serious fire so quickly. She had every reason to suspect that someone had set the fire on purpose. but there weren't even any surveillance cameras nearby. Walking back to the lounge, Feng Ling put down the 2 glasses of water. In fact, she didn't know how to comfort the old couple, but they had clearly been through a lot. At first, their emotions were indeed unstable, anxious, and excited, but now they had calmed down. Grandfather Feng sat on the chair in the lounge and sighed softly. From time to time, he asked the base members who were guarding them. He was concerned about the situation in the emergency room and wanted to know how serious the discipline of his son and daughter-in-law was. The base members didn't know this probability. They only knew that the survival rate was very low. At this time, they couldn't be provoked, so they could only answer that they didn't know. Old Madame Feng sat there, her eyes still red. When she saw Feng Ling return, she turned to look at her. When Feng Ling went to fetch the water, she turned on the tap and washed her face and eyes with cold water. Although her eyes were still slightly swollen, it was not too obvious. She had already taken off her sunglasses. Meeting old Madame Feng's gaze, she gently placed a disposable paper cup filled with warm water in her hand. "Drink some water first. Calm down." Old Madame Feng looked at her with mixed emotions. She wanted to say something. The whole family drove to the jungle because they heard that Feng Ling seemed to have lived there when she was young. When she heard this news, her heart ached uncontrollably. She really wanted to bring the child back to dote on her, but she didn't expect to encounter such a thing. Right now, she was looking at such a living granddaughter standing in front of her. Her features were delicate, and her personality was steady and dignified. Even though she did not receive higher education from the Feng family, she was clearly a very outstanding and sensible child. She was many times more mature than those spoiled, rich young ladies raised in wealthy families. She clearly had a lot to say, but when she saw her, she couldn't say a word. She held the cup in one hand and held Feng Ling's hand with the other, unwilling to let go. She said warmly, "Child, the Feng family has let you down." Feng Ling was startled for a moment. She then smiled lightly at the old lady. "No, now is not the time to talk about this. Please relax." Seeing that she was so sensible, old Madame Feng felt even worse. She put down the cup and held her hand. "Can you let me hug you well?" Grandma, I just want to hug you. I know you're worried about your parents. You look sensible. Your grandfather and I are also worried about them, but you're the child we've lost for 20 years. Right now, I just want to hug you properly." Feng Ling stood by her side and didn't speak. She looked at her with a pained expression. Grandma, I just want to hug you." Feng Ling looked at her and nodded slightly. Old Madame Feng instantly choked up. She resisted the urge to cry and hugged Feng Ling. Although old Madame Feng was old, she was a very famous model in the American Chinese world when she was young. Her height shrank as she grew older, but she was not short. In front of Feng Ling, she could hold the thin Feng Ling in her arms and hug her like an elder protecting a child. In her 21 years of life, this was the first time she felt the embrace of a family member. It was her own grandmother. Feng Ling had never resisted the Feng family, but she was not used to it. She didn't know how to face those people who were related to her by blood, so she didn't want to acknowledge them. However, at this moment, being hugged so tightly by her grandmother, a great sadness finally surrounded her. It was as though she was a child who was aggrieved and wanted to cry in her grandmother's arms. Her nose turned sour, but she held it in. She obediently allowed her to hug her. Hearing that Grandfather Feng was also walking over agitatedly, she did not push him away. "Child, you've been wronged." Grandfather Feng stood by the side and wanted to hug her, but seeing that his wife was reluctant to let go, he could only stand by the side and smile in relief. If it weren't for the fact that his son and daughter-in-law were still in the emergency room, his laughter would have been even brighter. He looked at Feng Ling. "How exactly did you live in that jungle? We've asked many people, but not many people know what you've experienced. Even if we know, we only know a little, but just that little is enough to make our hearts ache. You've really suffered too much. In the future, come back to the Feng family with us. We'll definitely do our best to make up for everything you've lost in the past 20 years. We love you very much and miss you very much. You're our Feng family's flesh and blood, our little granddaughter." Grandfather Feng stood by the side and wanted to hug her, but seeing that his wife was reluctant to let go, he could only stand by the side and smile in relief. Perhaps it was because she had just let go of her emotions and cried in front of Li Nanheng, so the defenses in her heart were not so heavy. Or perhaps it was because her grandparents' true feelings touched her. Feng Ling couldn't hold back her sour nose, and tears fell out. She didn't like to cry. She had never thought that people would really cry when they were emotionally touched. She had only told Li Nanheng about her experiences in her life. At that time, she did not say it in detail, but Li Nanheng could tell what her childhood was like from her life and habits. He had even accompanied her to live in the jungle for so long. In this world, it was enough for only Li Nanheng to know her experiences. She didn't want to be the kind of person who would show others the wounds that had long healed, so she didn't follow Grandfather Feng's words. Instead, she raised her hand and gently patted Grandmother Feng's back. She said softly, "I'm right here. I won't be lost again. You too should rest well." Grandfather Feng's eyes instantly turned red when he heard the words "won't be lost again." Grandmother Feng hugged her even tighter. At this moment, there was the sound of the base members greeting him respectfully. Then Li Nanheng appeared in front of the lounge. The man's gaze was solemn and indifferent as he looked at the two elders of the Feng family. He nodded politely at Grandfather Feng and glanced at the figure being held by the old lady. His voice was so serious that it made Feng Ling shiver. "Feng Ling, come out." Feng Ling patted the old lady's back again. She turned around and saw the man's solemn expression. Ching Ching has finally opened a reader group after more than a year of cheering from the readers. Ha ha ha, and it's a WeChat group. If you want to join, go take a look on Weibo and send me a private message to take a screenshot of my fan value. Chapter 1261. What's wrong? Feng Ling walked out of the lounge and looked up at him. Li Nanheng lowered his eyes to look at her, raised his hand, and gently rubbed her soft hair. He seemed to be very tired. This kind of exhaustion was not physical but psychological. Touching her hair and seeing the hope in her eyes, he said in a low voice, "They are not in good condition. You have to be mentally prepared." Feng Ling knew that they had inhaled too much smoke and had been in the jungle with a huge fire for so long. When she carried Mrs. Feng on her back, she could not feel her breath. She was indeed mentally prepared, but she habitually trusted Li Nanheng. He told her not to worry and to leave everything to him. But Li Nanheng was not an immortal. He could not bring a dying person back to life. That tiny bit of hope was shattered in the end. Feng Ling did not speak, but just pursed her lips and looked at him. Li Nanheng couldn't stand her silent and forbearing gaze. He glanced at the two old people who were still in the lounge, and an imperceptible heartache flashed across his eyes. He dragged her away and pressed her against the wall in a corridor that the two old people couldn't see. "There's still an emergency treatment, but the doctors are basically dealing with the aftermath. I know you can't bear it, but I can't hide it from you." Feng Ling was speechless. Indeed, she thought she was strong enough. But when this kind of thing really happened, she found that she really couldn't take it. Leaning against the wall, she felt speechless. In her mind, Mrs. Feng, Qin Xiu, looked at her excitedly and patiently in the shopping mall. She looked at her eagerly in the coffee shop. She smiled gently from time to time because of her and Li Nanheng's ambiguous love in the coffee shop. She had a mother and a father. They personally went to the jungle to pick her up and take her home. She thought that she had never come into contact with family since she was young and thought that she was indifferent to it. But she did not expect that such a strong blow would make her entire body numb. Feng Ling leaned against the wall and did not speak. Li Nanheng stood in front of her, holding her shoulder, giving her time to be silent, giving her time to digest and face, and accompanying her in silence. In the end, Feng Ling reached out to hug his neck and buried her face in his neck. She did not speak, but he felt the warm tears on his neck. He caressed her head. "My parents passed away when I was very young. I was too young at that time, and I didn't even have the emotions to cry or be sad. After living with a few elders, I've become numb to family love, but I can't deny its existence. When I'm sad, I cry. It takes time to heal. I've always been here. I have shoulders and chests. They're all yours. Feng Ling hugged him and nodded silently. Her tears still soaked his neck. He gently stroked the back of her head and held her firmly in his arms. Little Chiu. How could this be? How could this be? Just as Feng Ling was comforted by Li Nanheng and the two of them were walking back, they suddenly heard a trembling scream. The voice belonged to old Madame Feng. Feng Ling's expression stiffened, and she quickly walked over, only to see that old Madame Feng had already walked out. Not far away, the door of the emergency room was open. Qin Xiu's entire body and face were covered by a white cloth. The doctor had just informed the people 11 base and then pushed her out. She didn't expect there to be 2 old people here. As soon as she was pushed out, she was stopped and couldn't be pushed to the morgue. She could only stand there and watch the old people crying and pouncing on her. She had just learned that there was no hope. Now that she saw the person who was once smiling at her lying under a cold white cloth, Feng Ling's face instantly turned pale. She quickly walked over, and when old Madame Feng lifted the white cloth and threw herself on the bed to hug Qin Xiu, she walked forward and hugged old Madame Feng. She couldn't say anything. When she opened her mouth, she would definitely be choked with sobs. She tried her best to hold back all the tears that wanted to gush out, but she looked at the pale and motionless Qin Xiu with her own eyes. She saw that the tears had already dried up. They were probably shed in the emergency room, but in the end, she couldn't be saved. Even if no one was willing to believe that all of this was true, the whole family had been discussing how to bring her back last night. The whole family had been very happy and excited, but why did they suddenly separate forever? It would only take a few hours. It was just a big fire. His body was not burned at all. Everything was clean and tidy. But she was gone. The old lady threw herself on Qin Xiu's cold body and cried. She kept shouting, "Xiao Qiu, don't go." Feng Ling just came back. "You two haven't acknowledged each other yet, Xiao Qiu." These words all hit Feng Ling's heart. Feng Ling had just cried. Right now, she was holding back her tears. She hugged the old lady tightly with both hands, afraid that she would fall down. Grandfather Feng stood by the side and closed his eyes. His painful gaze shifted from Qin Xiu's pale face and finally landed on the medical staff at the end of the bed. Even though he knew that there was little hope, he still asked hoarsely, "What about the other one?" "My son, sir, the man inside is the same," the leading doctor said apologetically. He and his wife also inhaled a lot of smoke. No matter how advanced modern medicine is, it's really impossible to save this situation. However, the man's physical fitness is slightly stronger than his wife's. He barely regained some consciousness before, and now he's still breathing. Maybe he can see him for the last time. The doctor tried his best to be tactful. However, it was clear that he was saying that this was the last time he would see him before he completely died. There was no way to save him. When Grandfather Feng heard that his son could not be saved, he almost staggered. The members of 11 Base behind him quickly stepped forward to support him. "Elder Feng, my condolences." At this moment, the doctor suddenly looked at Li Nanheng, who had just walked behind Feng Ling and the old lady. "Mr. Li, the man inside is still dying, but we heard what he said during the emergency treatment. He said he wanted to see you." "See him?" He was about to die, and his daughter and family were outside. However, when Mr. Feng knew that he only had one breath left, he said he wanted to see Li Nanheng. Li Nanheng glanced at the doctor indifferently. The doctor nodded at him, indicating that what he said was true. At this time, the old lady had already fainted from crying. Feng Ling quickly helped her up, and Grandfather Feng could only rely on others to support him. The scene was chaotic. The doctor was already used to this situation and only told the patient's last words truthfully. W4M. Chapter 1262. Li Nanheng gave the members of 11 Base a look. They immediately understood what their boss meant and nodded. "We'll make arrangements for the 2 elders of the Feng family." Li Nanheng did not speak further. At the same time, his gaze landed on Feng Ling. She was hugging Madame Feng. Under the doctor's lead, he walked into the emergency room. After changing into a sterilized isolation suit, he walked in and walked to the bed inside. Mr. Feng was lying there with his eyes closed, motionless. Li Nanheng looked at the various medical equipment by the side. He heard the sounds of the heart and lungs breathing and all the machines that represented the human body's vitality. He saw Mr. Feng's weak breathing and the frequency of his heart that was about to stop beating. He walked to the bedside. "Sir, Mr. Li is here. Can you still hear me?" The doctor walked over and removed the blood pressure measurement from Mr. Feng's fingertips. This thing was no longer of any use to him, but when it was removed, the other party would more or less feel it. After a long minute, Mr. Feng's eyelids moved slightly. His fingers also moved slightly. He could not open his eyes, but he moved his lips with great difficulty. Li Nanheng looked at him. A moment later, he leaned down and pressed his lips against his lips. He heard him say 2 words in a barely audible voice. He spoke with great difficulty and could hardly be heard clearly, but the emergency room was very quiet. Li Nanheng listened quietly. After a while, he finally finished listening to Mr. Feng's words, and his eyes were as deep as the sea. Then a long beep came from the medical equipment by the side. When Mr. Feng was pushed out with a white cloth, the 2 elders of the Feng family had already been helped back to the break room by the people of 11 Base. Only Feng Ling stood outside the emergency room and watched him walk out. Feng Ling stood there quietly. When she watched Mr. Feng being pushed out with a white cloth, her gaze lingered on the person on the bed for a long time until Li Nanheng asked her, "Do you want to see your biological father?" Feng Ling raised her hand. She wanted to lift the white cloth, but in the end, she only hung in the air and gently clenched her fist. "No, he's already gone. Let him rest in peace." Hearing her words, the doctor continued to push her towards the elevator to send her to the morgue. When all the medical staff had left, the corridor outside the emergency room was so quiet that even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. Li Nanheng still stood there watching her. Feng Ling did not leave either. She just looked back at the man. "What did he say to you?" Li Nanheng did not answer. He walked up to her, lowered his eyes to look at her for a moment, and then raised his hand to pull her into his arms. Feng Ling knew that her father must have said something to Li Nanheng, but Li Nanheng did not say anything. He only hugged her and kissed her forehead. "What do you want to do now?" "I want to kill someone." Feng Ling answered straightforwardly. "The first time I had the urge to kill was when I faced that fat commander at the military base. Then I really killed him. This is the second time. I really want to kill someone." Li Nanheng's hand landed on the back of her head comfortingly and gently stroked it. "I understand." She hadn't returned home yet, and she hadn't recognized her relatives yet. Suddenly, she was separated from her parents for 20 years. They only wanted to go to the jungle to pick up their child. Everything should have developed in a good direction, but why did such a fire suddenly happen? Feng Ling closed her eyes. She clenched her fingers so hard that there was a sound of bones crisscrossing. "From now on, no matter what I do, don't stop me." Li Nanheng's hand paused on the back of her head, and Feng Ling continued, "I won't do anything illegal." A moment later, the man responded in a low voice, and it was said that the forest fire burned for 2 days and 1 night before the fire was slightly smaller. Only then could the fire trucks successfully approach and gradually put out the remaining fire. The entire jungle had almost been burned to the ground. When they approached, the ground was covered in charcoal and black tree trunks. When the wind blew, the air was filled with the smell of burning. This fire affected the tourism environment near Malibu Beach. The United States Tourism Administration was very angry and reported it to the higher-ups. In less than 48 hours, it had already alarmed the higher-ups. They sent people from all over to investigate the cause of the fire in the jungle and ask questions everywhere. However, that jungle was not a place that anyone could easily approach. There were no surveillance cameras around, so there was no way to investigate. They only knew that the Feng family had appeared there in the end, but Mr. Feng and Mrs. Feng had already died because of this forest fire. The old man and old lady of the Feng family were sent to the hospital's recuperation center to be comforted and cared for by a psychiatrist. Right now, it was not suitable for the police to collect evidence and interview them. Who else was there in the Feng family? Feng Mingzhu. However, from the beginning of the incident until now, Feng Mingzhu had never appeared. Originally, Even if someone had considered if it had something to do with Feng Mingzhu, Feng Ling believed that no matter how crazy Feng Mingzhu was, she wouldn't do something like burning her biological parents to death. She was just too extreme and muddle-headed. It was impossible for her to do such a heinous thing. However, for 3 days, Feng Mingzhu did not appear. When they received news from the customs that Feng Mingzhu was in a hurry to leave the United States with someone else's passport and identity card, she was caught by the customs and was currently detained at the airport. After learning that Feng Mingzhu was actually secretly escaping to leave the United States, Feng Ling felt as though she had fallen into an ice cave. Airport Customs Center. Feng Mingzhu sat on a chair inside. She had no time to look at the luggage by her hand. From time to time, she raised her pale face and panicked eyes to look at the customs staff coming and going. When the people on duty here turned to help carry the luggage, she suddenly stood up and walked in the direction of the bathroom. The customs staff only noticed that her behavior was a little strange, but they did not find out that she had done anything illegal. However, they still investigated her matter out of suspicion and learned that she might be related to the recent incident of the Feng family in the Chinese community of Los Angeles. Thus, they kept an eye on her and called the relevant departments. Afterward, they somehow contacted the people from 11 Base. The higher-ups wanted them to detain this Feng Mingzhu and not let her leave the country. Thus, they were only responsible for watching her. The fake passport and identity card had been left behind, and the real passport had been disqualified from the passport database. Feng Mingzhu had already lost the chance to leave the United States smoothly. The people here were only responsible for checking the luggage. Although there were many people, no security guards were sent over. Feng Mingzhu wanted to take this opportunity to find the right time to escape. W4M. Chapter 1263. A figure hurriedly went to the washroom of the Customs Inspection Center and took off his coat. Then, he hurriedly took out a pair of sunglasses from his coat and put them on. He tied his hair up high into a ponytail. His whole appearance and temperament seemed to have changed a little. She wanted to sneak out while the staff of the Customs Center were not paying attention. Feng Mingzhu saw that 2 people who worked as agents were detained by the customs. Many customs officers went up to forcefully open their suitcases to check their items. When their attention was on the 2 illegal agents, they didn't care about their suitcases anymore and quickly jumped out of the door by the side. 2 or 3 minutes later, the customs staff suddenly found that Feng Mingzhu had disappeared. They went to the washroom and saw the coat thrown there. They hurriedly came out and sounded the alarm. In the large Los Angeles airport, Feng Mingzhu was hiding everywhere. Suddenly, the entire airport's alarm rang, scaring her to the point where she had nowhere to run. She hid in a deserted corner, trembling all over, and her eyes lost focus as she stared into the distance. Her arms wrapped around her shoulders, she squatted there, buried her face between her legs, and cried silently in fear. The alarm didn't stop. From time to time, the sound of an English broadcast came from the airport, and the entire airport was filled with Feng Mingzhu's name. Feng Mingzhu felt that she couldn't hide here. Sooner or later, she would be discovered by the patrols or security guards here. Taking advantage of the fact that there was no one around, she came out of the corner and wandered around the washrooms. In the end, she wanted to find an opportunity to walk to the exit or the parking lot to leave. However, while Feng Mingzhu was walking quickly to find a way out, she didn't know that all the entrances and exits of the Los Angeles airport, which covered an area of 2.6 million square meters, had been quickly guarded by members of the 11 Base. She didn't know that all the visible surveillance areas on every floor of the airport had been thoroughly checked. 15 minutes later, Feng Mingzhu managed to blend into the group of people who had just landed outside the airport hall. From time to time, she pushed up the sunglasses on her face and walked out of the crowd. Just as she was about to walk out of the airport hall, suddenly, a group of people wearing the black uniforms of the 11 Base appeared in front of her and surrounded her. As soon as Feng Mingzhu saw their clothes and the cold and solemn expressions on their faces, she trembled and froze in place. In the next moment, she saw the members of the 11 Base take the initiative to give way. When she saw the people approaching in front of her step by step, she felt as though the whole world was about to collapse. Feng Mingzhu's expression was ashen. She watched as Feng Ling approached her step by step. Feng Ling's gaze was cold, and there was undisguised coldness and killing intent in her eyes. She stopped 4 or 5 meters away from Feng Mingzhu and looked at her coldly. You? Feng Mingzhu had thought of many possibilities. She thought it was the police or someone else, but she never expected that the person who came to arrest her would be Feng Ling. What about me? Feng Ling looked at her expressionlessly. Her eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of ice. If you didn't escape, I wouldn't have thought that this whole matter would really have something to do with you. The police haven't even found any surveillance cameras near the area, but you've been hiding for so many days. You even want to use a fake identity to leave the United States. Not to mention that it's impossible for you to leave, even if you really leave, as long as 11 Base wants to track you down. Where do you think you can escape to? Even if you hide in the South Pole, there's still nowhere to run. Feng Mingzhu's expression was deathly pale. What are you talking about? I just accidentally took the wrong passport. When did I say that I wanted to use a fake identity to leave the country? However, Feng Ling did not wait for her to finish speaking. She only sneered and casually took out the real passport that belonged to Feng Mingzhu from her pocket. When Feng Mingzhu looked at the thing in her hand in disbelief and was speechless, she suddenly threw the passport heavily on her face. Feng Mingzhu was in pain, but she looked at the people from 11 Base around her and then at the gun on Feng Ling's waist. Her lips trembled, and she could not say a word for a long time. They were clearly sisters, but at this moment, they were actually meeting each other with such identities. Feng Ling looked at her coldly for a long time. It was so long that Feng Mingzhu was about to be frozen under her gaze. Feng Ling asked coldly, "Why did you do this?" Feng Mingzhu closed her eyes. From the moment she learned that her parents had entered the jungle and that they had died in the fire, she knew that she was finished. Originally, she wanted to hide, but now she knew that she had no hope at all. Whether it was Feng Ling, the Feng family, or the police, they would not let her off. It was impossible for her grandparents to protect her. She didn't know why she suddenly walked into a desperate situation. She just wanted to stop Feng Ling from coming back. Feng Mingzhu closed her eyes. It was unknown whether she was crying or smiling. After a long time of tolerance, she suddenly knelt on the ground and cried loudly. She cried until her neck was red and her entire face was red. She cried until she was out of breath and shouted, "I didn't want to kill them. I didn't expect them to go in. Those are my parents. They're my parents. I only want to burn you to death, not them." Feng Ling's hands that were quietly hanging by her legs suddenly clenched in a fist. I didn't want to. Feng Mingzhu had completely broken down. "I haven't eaten or slept for days. I just don't want you to go back to the Feng family. Why do you want to live? I just want you to die there. The person I want to burn to death is you. But why are they the ones who die? Why?" She raised her hand and held her head hard, screaming and crying. "I don't want to do this either. Why do they go in? I don't want to kill them at all. But what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? By the time I know, it's already too late." Feng Ling endured and walked forward, kicking Feng Mingzhu's chest hard. She then walked forward and pulled Feng Mingzhu up, who had been kicked to the ground. She grabbed her collar tightly with both hands and looked at her fiercely and coldly. "Feng Mingzhu, you're really stupid. How can I have the same blood as you?" Feng Mingzhu's entire body was in a sorry state. She looked at her with a miserable expression. Feng Ling's kick was very painful, and there seemed to be the taste of blood in her throat. She tried hard to swallow it, but a cold gun was suddenly pressed against her forehead. Feng Mingzhu shivered all over and looked at her with trembling eyes filled with fear. "We're clearly sisters, but there's such a big gap between us. Do you think you're the daughter of a famous family? You've been living a luxurious life since you were young, and I'm an orphan who can't be on your so-called stage?" Feng Ling's voice was cold, and she said word by word coldly, "But do you know where the real gap between us is? That is, if you want to kill me, it's still as difficult as ascending to heaven as you plan carefully and advance step by step. And if I want you to die, I can make your blood splatter on the spot right now." Asking for monthly votes, 4M. Chapter 1264. Feng Ling had already pulled the trigger. As long as she hooked her finger, she could immediately send Feng Mingzhu to meet her parents. Feng Mingzhu's eyes were full of fear. She knew she was doomed. But facing a woman who seemed to be possessed by the king of hell, she really felt a gun pressed against her head. Her head could be blown off at any time, and the fear of death surrounded her. She trembled violently and looked at Feng Ling in disbelief. Are you going to kill people in a place like the airport? Feng Ling, how can you be so bold? If you dare to set fire to the jungle, you should have investigated my childhood. I grew up drinking wolf's milk. How can I be humane? The only reason I've kept you alive until today is because I've never cared about you. Feng Ling's tone was very indifferent, but the gun in her hand was very cold. It was as cold as her voice. You set fire to the forest and killed your parents. The Feng family can no longer be your backer. The police in 11 Base won't let you off, especially me. Even if I shoot you here, it's just a matter of writing another complaint. It won't cause any trouble. Do you think I don't dare? After being in contact with Feng Ling for so long, Feng Mingzhu only knew that she seemed to be a very powerful character in 11 Base, but Feng Ling had always been very gentle and aloof. She was always indifferent and didn't even have the desire to quarrel with others. This was the first time Feng Mingzhu felt Feng Ling's killing intent. It was a terrible killing intent. You can't kill me. Feng Mingzhu tried to suppress the fear in her eyes and glared at her. I'm your sister. You can't do anything to me. The Feng family is in deep trouble now. If you dare to do anything to me, have you thought about Grandpa and Grandma? Will they be able to take this blow? Before she could finish speaking, she was abruptly slapped to the ground by Feng Ling. The slap was so hard that the corner of Feng Mingzhu's mouth cracked in pain. There was a faint trace of blood at the corner of her mouth. She lay on the ground and only recovered from the dizziness after a long while. She turned her eyes in disbelief and looked at the gun in Feng Ling's hand. The muzzle was still aimed at her, but Feng Ling had already taken a step back and looked down at her expressionlessly. Looking at the black muzzle, Feng Mingzhu shuddered. I don't want to kill you, but my parents, who were killed by you, have just found peace in the underworld. They don't seem to want to see you so soon. Feng Ling's voice was cold and indifferent. If I want to take revenge, I have countless ways to make you wish you were dead. Feng Mingzhu, don't stimulate the bloodthirsty and dark side hidden in my bones. Otherwise, I will bite off your flesh bit by bit, cut you into thousands of pieces, and throw you into the deep mountains and wild forests. I will even do things like that. Feng Mingzhu didn't expect that she could say such bloody and terrifying words. Her entire face was pale, and her eyes were filled with fear. Feng Ling narrowed her eyes coldly. The muzzle still aimed at her head, and sneered. Do you want me to remind you again? I grew up drinking wolf's milk. Feng Mingzhu trembled under her gaze. From the beginning to now, you're just a prey that can be torn apart at any time in front of me. I don't touch you because you're a member of the Feng family. Secondly, I never thought that a person could be so stupid that she could kill her own parents. If you were smart enough, it would be fine. At least, you wouldn't harm others and yourself. But unfortunately, you're really stupid to the point that you deserve to die. Feng Ling coldly looked at her face that was filled with fear. Feng Mingzhu, do you really want to taste the feeling of being torn apart? I don't. Feng Mingzhu breathed heavily and abruptly tried to get up from the ground. However, the moment she got up, she was kicked to the ground by Feng Ling again. Her head hit the empty chair by the side and trembled miserably on the ground for a long time. Then she curled up and leaned against the chair, barely managing to sit up. She looked carefully at the thing in Feng Ling's hand. That gun. Seeing the fear and concern in her eyes, Feng Ling's eyes were still cold. Don't worry, this is a silencer gun. Even if I kill you here, few people will hear it. Feng Mingzhu trembled all over and carefully looked at the expressionless members of 11 Base around her. Obviously, if Feng Ling really wanted to kill someone, these people would definitely surround her, and she had no chance of breaking through the encirclement. She shrank her neck and leaned against the ground in a sorry state. Suddenly, there were two muffled sounds in the air. Before Feng Mingzhu could react, she saw two dazzling sparks coming out of the muzzle of the gun in Feng Ling's hand. She was so frightened that her heart was in her throat, and her whole body trembled violently. However, the two bullets that came out of the silencer only hit the seat behind her. The shooting was so accurate that it only hit the metal backrest behind the seat and did not damage the seat. The bullets hit the metal backrest and bounced back, directly hitting Feng Mingzhu's shoulder. It was so painful that even though her shoulder was not hit by the bullets, it still hurt. How do one die? Feng Ling's voice was indifferent, and her eyes were cold as she looked at her. She just stood there, looking down at her, and she had no intention of putting the silencer gun back. Feng Mingzhu's face was deathly pale. She wanted to hold the back of the chair behind her to stand up, but after trying for a long time, she couldn't get up. She stared blankly at Feng Ling. It wasn't easy for her to prop her legs up, but this time, Feng Ling shot the ground under her feet. She was so frightened that she fell heavily back to the ground. She felt that the bullet was close to her feet. If she dared to move again, her bullet would definitely hit her. Feng Ling, what exactly do you want? Feng Mingzhu sat stiffly on the ground for a long time, and in the end, she seemed to be about to be driven crazy. She looked at her blankly. What? He didn't even plan on going back to acknowledge his parents. Now, he was going to avenge his parents with righteous indignation? What right do you have to avenge them? Who do you think you are? Do you think I'm really afraid of you, Another shot. This time, it brushed past her ear, accurately brushing past her earlobe, leaving behind a scorched trail of blood. The bullet once again landed on the back of the metal chair behind her, making a crisp dang sound. Feng Mingzhu was so shocked that she swallowed back all the words she was about to say due to the shock. Chapter 1265. Feng Ling really wanted to take her life just like that. She really couldn't bear to see her like this. At the thought of the fire in the Malibu jungle and Qin Xiu, who was pushed out of the emergency room with a white cloth, she wished she could kill her on the spot. After several consecutive mental tortures, Feng Mingzhu, who had already broken down, burst into tears. She clutched her clothes tightly with both hands, but her eyes were filled with fear. She didn't even have the strength to get up. Feng Ling held the gun in her hand tightly and looked at her. Every word was cold and clear. I promised Li Nanheng that I wouldn't do anything illegal and wouldn't let him worry. I won't take your life. Keep it and slowly waste it in the cold prison. Feng Mingzhu trembled and looked at her in disbelief. What are you going to do? There's no death penalty in American law. Feng Ling, if you dare. At this moment, the cold muzzle of the gun was suddenly pressed against her forehead. Feng Ling walked forward, leaned down, and pressed the muzzle against her. She said lightly, "There's no death penalty in the law, but I do. Unfortunately, death is too easy. It's better to let you suffer in prison for the rest of your life. I'll let you repent and torture yourself every day and night for killing your parents with your own hands." Feng Mingzhu opened her mouth. You. At this moment, Feng Ling put away the gun and no longer looked at her. She turned around expressionlessly and walked away. After taking a few steps, she said coldly, "Take her away." Behind her, Feng Mingzhu screamed in horror as she was dragged up by the members of 11 Base. Feng Ling quickly walked out of the airport hall with her hands in her pockets. She had been suppressing her temper that was on the verge of erupting. She was afraid that if she really couldn't control it well, Feng Mingzhu would really die here. She knew very well just how much she wanted to kill Feng Mingzhu right now. She endured it until her hands trembled. She endured it until the tip of her tongue hurt from being bitten by her, and the taste of blood spread in her mouth. Only then did she calm down. She put the safety of the gun in her pocket back on to prevent herself or the people accompanying her from accidentally injuring herself or the people accompanying her. Feng Mingzhu was dragged into the car and kept screaming. Feng Ling did not look back. She only looked at the blue sky above the airport highway in the distance. It had been a long time since she had seen the sky like this. In the forest, she had always lived in the shade of the dense forest. Although there were occasional rays of sunlight, it was not much. It had been a long time since she had seen such a clear blue sky. Feng Mingzhu returned to the hospital. As she promised, she only caught Feng Mingzhu back and asked the people of 11 Bays to take her to the police station. Feng Mingzhu was now stimulated by the death of her parents and was incoherent, but all the evidence was with her. As long as she handed it over to the police, they would find out what method she used to set fire to the forest so smoothly. However, when she returned to the hospital, there were not many people left in the hospital. The two elders of the Feng family had been traumatized and had been accompanied by a psychiatrist. Mr. Feng and Mrs. Feng were in the morgue. Feng Ling didn't know what else she could do in this place, so after entering the hospital, she did not enter again. Instead, she sat on the bench by the side of the hall on the first floor. Her eyes were lifeless as she sat there motionlessly. Li Nanheng learned that she had returned, but he did not wait for her to go upstairs. Not long after, he learned from the members of the base that she was sitting on the first floor in a daze and walked down. He was walking on the escalator, facing where Feng Ling was sitting. The man walked over step by step. Feng Ling's eyes were indeed looking in that direction, but she seemed to have lost focus as though she hadn't seen anything. Clearly, she had fallen into a kind of self-consciousness. When she vaguely felt a familiar aura, Feng Ling's eyes moved and she recovered some energy. She raised her eyes to meet Li Nanheng's gaze. The man had already walked up to her and looked down at her. "I didn't kill her," Feng Ling said stiffly and mechanically. Li Nanheng reached out and stroked her face. "I know." All the wariness and thorns in her body seemed to be instinctively retracted in front of him. Because of the man's approach, Feng Ling pressed her head against his body and pressed her forehead against his abdomen. She whispered, "I don't know what else I can do. The Feng family is in a mess right now. I didn't want to have anything to do with the people in this family, but I can't control myself now. I really feel terrible." Li Nanheng gently patted her shoulder. "Leave everything to me." Feng Ling pressed her head against his firm abdomen and closed her eyes. She raised her hands and silently hugged him. After a long time, she asked in a low voice, "What should I do next?" She didn't know if her senses were wrong, but she seemed to feel that after a few seconds of silence, Li Nanheng touched her hair. "Let's deal with Mrs. Feng and Mr. Feng's funeral first. After sending them away, I'll tell you what you should do." At this time, Feng Ling trusted Li Nanheng unconditionally. She also believed that everything he did for her was developing in a good direction. She also knew that he would definitely plan a good situation for her. Everything would be arranged according to her. However, her home in the jungle was gone. She hugged him tightly and said in a muffled and hoarse voice, "In the future, Li Nanheng interrupted her and said warmly, "You haven't slept well these days. We'll deal with the funeral tomorrow. Go to sleep first. I'll accompany you." Feng Ling nodded and was about to get up when the man hugged her. Before she could react, he picked her up by the waist. She was startled. The moment the man picked her up, she turned to meet his gaze. She instinctively wrapped her hand around his neck and looked at the man's face and his firm, dark eyes that seemed to be able to cover all pain and suffering for her. At this moment, she suddenly rejoiced that she had held back. She didn't like to cause trouble for Li Nanheng. Even though she knew that even if she really shot Feng Mingzhu at the airport, Li Nanheng still had the ability to protect her. But she didn't want to cause trouble for him. Li Nanheng hoped that everything would be fine for her. He didn't want her to be involved in these troublesome matters. Looking at the man's cold and clean side profile, Feng Ling's fatigue finally surged into her heart. She closed her eyes and leaned against his shoulder, allowing him to carry her to the break room. Chapter 1266. Feng Ling didn't know how to deal with her parents' funeral. After Feng Mingzhu was taken away, she had been in a daze for the past few days. During this period, she had cooperated with a psychiatrist to treat the two elders of the Feng family and had visited them. The two elders were already old. In just a few days, the white-haired people had sent off the black-haired people, and they had become even more haggard. However, when they saw that Feng Ling was still standing here, they felt somewhat relieved. Feng Ling wasn't sure if they knew about Feng Mingzhu. They didn't mention Feng Mingzhu's name, so they should know. If they didn't mention her name, It meant that they didn't want to mention these things anymore. This was a good thing. This was enough to show that the two elders were not stupid people. They knew the truth. Even if she was their own granddaughter, they couldn't protect her after discovering such a thing. In fact, Feng Mingzhu's original intention was to burn Feng Ling to death. This intention was even more chilling. No matter how one looked at it, Feng Mingzhu was completely defeated because of her poor planning and excessive haste. She would never be able to come out again in her lifetime. When the matter with the Feng family came to an end, the member of the base who was in charge of dealing with the jungle returned and brought her a few photos of the scene. Feng Ling looked at the enlarged photos on the screen of her phone and saw that the jungle she had lived in since she was a child had completely turned into a charred ruin. The entire jungle, with a radius of thousands of hectares, was no longer recognizable. The members of the base took photos of the house and cave where she and Li Nanheng lived. As the house was near the cave, there weren't many trees around. The tall grass had long been cleared because they lived there. There was nothing flammable within a few hundred meters, so only the left corner of the cabin had been burned a little. The originally beautiful cabin had now been completely blackened. The clean, tidy, and lively little yard that she and Li Nanheng had personally built was now completely gone. Even though the house was still there and the outline of the house could still be seen clearly, it could no longer be lived in. The psychiatrist that Li Nanheng had arranged for the two elders of the Feng family accompanied them home. For the time being, he needed to observe them for a period of time. After all, these two elderly people were old and had seen a lot of things. Although it was really painful for the elderly to send off the young, they had recovered well. After a few days of psychological treatment and emotional control, as well as the quiet funeral arrangements, the two elderly people just wanted to go back and rest for a while. Li Nanheng was in charge of the matter. He did not let Feng Ling interfere. After everything was done, Feng Ling stood in front of the hospital door and watched as the two elders of the Feng family were helped into the car. Kay walked behind her. Are you really not going back to the Feng family with them? Feng Ling's family background was not spread in the base, but the people around her had basically learned about it after these days. If the Feng family needs help, I will do my best to help, but there is only 11 base behind me. If there is anything that can be called back, it is only 11 base, Feng Ling said softly as she watched the two old people's car leave. Kay nodded. That's good. You haven't come into contact with outsiders for so many years. In the beginning, we were worried. If you really followed these two elders back to the Feng family to become the daughter of some rich family, that kind of scene really feels very strange, and you definitely won't be used to it. But then again, Boss Lee really spoils you enough. He has accompanied you outside for so long. Now you can finally return to the team, right? The group of newbies you trained back then is now quite good. You can go back at any time to continue training the newbies. Anyway, their drill master is temporarily sent by Han Jin. On the other side, Kay was chatting and laughing with Feng Ling, and Feng Ling also responded from time to time. Li Nanheng came back from outside, and his gaze fell on Kay. Kay's expression faltered, and he quickly took 2 steps back from Feng Ling's side. He then said with a smile, "Boss, I'm talking to Feng Ling. I'm afraid that she will go back to the Feng family with us because her heart aches for her grandparents. But I've already gotten the truth out of her. She has no intention of going back at all. Boss, you've been waiting for a long time." Was he trying to trick her? Feng Ling didn't smile much, but hearing Kay's words, she smiled helplessly. Boss knows better than me what I think. Do I need you to trick me? I've never wanted to leave you guys. All right, you're the most loyal to the base. Kay glanced at her. I won't disturb you from showing your loyalty in front of Boss. I'll leave first. When you return to the base, the brothers will give you and Boss a good welcome. Feng Ling nodded. She couldn't go back to the jungle. She had planned to return to the base after winter, but now it was only a few months ahead of schedule, so it was fine. Li Nanheng did not speak, but Feng Ling instinctively felt that he had something to say. After Kay left, she looked up at him. Boss. She had always been embarrassed to call him husband or something. Usually, she would just call him Nanheng. To her, the most intimate and familiar thing was to call him boss. Even the past 6 months in the jungle, she often called him by his full name or boss. except when he always forced her to call him husband in bed. Nanheng did not force her to change her way of addressing him. Let's go. Where to? Home. When Feng Ling heard these two words, the first thing that came to her mind was the cabin in the jungle that had been blackened to the point where no one could live in it anymore. She dispelled this unrealistic idea and thought of the Feng family. Neither seemed possible, so she didn't understand which home he was talking about. However, what happened recently made her used to listening to his arrangements. She didn't ask much and followed him. She opened the door and was about to sit in the car when she suddenly saw a document bag placed on the passenger seat. She glanced at it, picked it up, and asked him, "What is this?" "It's for you." Li Nanheng didn't look at the document bag in her hand and replied, "Get in the car and go home first. There's no hurry to read it." Feng Ling got into the car and looked at the document bag in her hand. She didn't see any words on it. He said he was not in a hurry to read it, so she didn't look at it and placed it in the box by the car door. Begging for monthly votes. Chapter 1267. Feng Ling didn't know what Li Nanheng was trying to tell her about going home. Recently, because of the Feng family's matter, Feng Ling wasn't mentally exhausted, but her mood was definitely affected. She didn't have the mood to consider many things. Right now, the only reason why she could return to normal was that she had been used to being alone since she was young. Her concept of family affection was very vague. The death of her parents was indeed very sad, but she didn't always put her unhappiness on the surface. A few days ago, when she went to talk to grandmother Feng, she heard that Qin Xiu had long known about her. However, because she could tell that Feng Ling liked freedom and didn't want to return to the Feng family, she respected her choice and didn't disturb her. What kind of gentlewoman was Qin Xiu? Feng Ling was deeply gratified and proud that she had such a mother. Even though they were separated forever, at least her heart was warm. Li Nanheng drove the car to a large supermarket in Los Angeles. Feng Ling didn't understand what he wanted to buy, so she got out of the car and walked in. In the end, the man bought a bunch of ingredients and hot pot seasonings. This scene was very similar to when he helped her cook hot pot at home. Was he planning to accompany her for a while before returning to the base? After all, although every day in the jungle was peaceful and happy, he really could not eat hot pot. Usually, he ate whatever was available. He had almost forgotten the taste of the food outside after a long time. He had gone out to buy something at the last minute that day, but in fact, the taste was very average near the beach. Seeing the seasonings and hot pot ingredients that the man had placed in the shopping cart, Feng Ling subconsciously swallowed and accompanied him to choose various ingredients and vegetables. The two of them walked in the supermarket for a long time and bought one thing after another in the car. At first, Feng Ling thought that Li Nanheng planned to stay in the home he mentioned for a while so that she could ease the regret of not being able to return to the jungle, so she wanted to buy more things. However, later, she found that Li Nanheng did not continue to put things in the shopping cart. Instead, he seemed to be delaying for a long time. He walked aimlessly in the supermarket, and time passed bit by bit. Feng Ling asked him if he had anything to buy, but he forgot. What did he want to buy? He then casually picked up a bottle of sesame paste from the supermarket shelf. "I forgot, but I heard that hot pot with this kind of sesame paste is common in China. I can buy it and try it." "All right." Feng Ling checked the things in the shopping cart. "It's almost enough. I've already bought a lot." The man glanced at her and pushed the shopping cart to the cashier. In the end, they did buy a lot of things. There were 2 big bags full. Feng Ling was afraid that the bags would fall out because they were too heavy, so she specially bought 2 more shopping bags. She wanted to help carry them, but Li Nanheng had already picked up the bags and carried them out. She followed behind and watched the man's tall and straight back. She felt that he was going to use this hot pot to fill her to death. Otherwise, why would he buy so many? When you say go home, do you mean go back here? Feng Ling looked at Li Nanheng's apartment in Los Angeles and looked up. She still remembered that on the floor below his apartment, he was the one who bought the apartment for her. She had never lived in her own apartment. Li Nanheng didn't speak, but got out of the car and carried the things he had bought in. This man seemed particularly silent today. Feng Ling was about to get out of the car when she suddenly heard him remind her to take out the file in the car. Hearing this, Feng Ling picked up the file, got out of the car, and walked out. When she followed him into the apartment, she saw that the security guards outside were still the same too. In fact, she hadn't been here many times, but the security guards seemed to recognize her. They smiled politely and warmly at her, as if asking, "Ah, I haven't seen you for many years. You're finally back?" Feng Ling responded with a faint smile. It was not until Li Nanheng, who had already entered the elevator, urged her to go over that she quickly followed him into the elevator. The two security guards outside the door were surprised by Feng Ling's smile. This young lady who appeared with Mr. Li had short hair. At that time, she was dressed like a little boy and never smiled at strangers. Her face was always cold, but just now, her hair had grown quite a bit. It looked like it was almost the length of her neck. Her hair was soft, and her personality seemed to be much calmer and gentler. She was no longer so cold and distant, and she could even smile at them. In just a few years, the callous young man had transformed into a gentle and peaceful woman. Feng Ling's personality had never changed. It was just that in the past, she was used to hiding herself and didn't like to be close to others. She never smiled at others because she didn't know why she should smile. Was there a need to smile? In the past few years, she had been sharpened and experienced many things. She no longer treated people with the same attitude as before, but she was still the same person in her bones. It was just that she seemed to be a lot gentler. The tomboy who had dressed up as a man back then looked very different from the carefree Feng Ling who had grown a bit of hair. As a result, when the security guard outside the door looked at her with a smile, his eyes seemed to be a little stunned. Feng Ling was thinking in the elevator. At the same time, she was considering if she should find time to trim her hair again. She hadn't cut it in the jungle. Now that it was so long, it seemed like it could be tied up. However, she might need some small clips to clip some stray hair by her ears. Before she could think about it, the elevator stopped. Li Nanheng did not speak and walked out. She quickly followed him with the document in her hand. When the door opened, she walked into the apartment she had lived in when she was recuperating. Looking at the clean interior and the clean indoor slippers in front of the door, she knew that although no one had lived in this apartment for a long time, the Annie must have taken time to clean it. Such cleanliness was indeed in line with Li Nanheng's usual obsession with cleanliness. If his own apartment was covered in dust, he probably wouldn't be able to accompany her to clean the house like he did in the jungle. Li Nanheng put the two shopping bags aside and turned back to see that Feng Ling was still standing at the door. His cold brows moved. "What? Are you used to living in the wooden house and don't dare to enter the apartment outside? Haven't you been here before?" Feng Ling was slightly embarrassed and quickly changed her shoes. As she did so, she said, "I remember that the floor below is the apartment you bought for me, and it's been renovated a long time ago, but you probably won't have a chance to live in it. Just leave it for now," the man said lightly and picked up the shopping bag to enter the kitchen. Chapter 1268. If she came here, she would stay with him. She definitely wouldn't have a chance to stay here. Feng Ling saw that he had entered the kitchen and followed him to take a look. She had just moved close to his back when a man pulled her into his arms. He lowered his head and stole a kiss on her lips. He then pressed his lips against her ear and said, "Go wash the fruits and cut some fruits to eat. We'll cook hot pot tonight." Feng Ling instinctively turned her neck to the side because of the man's voice and breath. Li Nanheng looked at her white neck, chuckled, and bit her neck again. She cried out in pain and quickly pushed him away. She wanted to help him, but when they were in the jungle, this man had already developed the habit of taking care of her everywhere. He almost let her idle by the side. Now that he arranged for her to wash the fruit, he was already giving her face. She took out the small bag of fruit from the shopping bag in front of him and went to the side to turn on the tap to wash it. After the sound of water flowing for a while, Feng Ling washed and cut the fruit and placed it on the fruit plate. She then picked up a piece of pineapple with a fork and handed it to Li Nanheng's mouth. Li Nanheng took a bite and, as she expected, frowned. "Why is it sour again? How many pineapples aren't sour?" As Feng Ling spoke, She picked up a piece of sweet pear and placed it by his mouth. The man lowered his head and was about to eat it, but she suddenly took the pear back and ate it herself. Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows and glanced at her because of her mischievous actions, but Feng Ling said as she forked other fruits, "I won't give you the pear. 2 days ago, I heard Kay and the others say that pears are not suitable for sharing. Then, I'll give you grapes." After stuffing the grapes into the man's mouth, she returned to the living room with the fruit plate in satisfaction. She put down the fruit plate and glanced at the document bag on the coffee table. Remembering that he said it was for her, she was about to pick it up and open it to see what it was. "There are clothes you can wear in the closet in the bedroom. Go change into comfortable clothes." The man's voice came from the kitchen. Feng Ling's eyes shifted to the bedroom. She hadn't lived in his apartment for long. Why would there be clothes for her? She subconsciously walked into the bedroom and opened the door of the closet. Sure enough, there were a few women's clothes in her size. They were all new and the tags had not been removed. When did he buy them? It couldn't have been recently. In other words, after she stayed here for a few days, Li Nanheng had specially bought a few new clothes to put here because of all the inconveniences. She was wearing casual clothes in the jungle. These days, because of her parents and the Feng family's second son, she didn't pay much attention to her clothes in the hospital. She needed a change, so Kay and the others brought some clothes from the base that she could wear. However, those straight men didn't know how to search for clothes in her empty room, so they casually picked 2 uniforms and sent them to her. The black combat uniform did look valiant and heroic, but it was inconvenient to wear at home. Moreover, it was tight-fitting. Feng Ling picked out several new clothes and finally chose the softest and most comfortable short-sleeve t-shirt and sporty light-colored trousers. Because her long hair made the back of her neck itchy, she casually combed her hair back, but she never had anything to tie her hair with. A grown man like Li Nanheng definitely wouldn't have one. A few things she had bought in the supermarket appeared in front of her eyes. Her eyes lit up and she walked out. After going to the kitchen, she rummaged through the shopping bag by Li Nanheng's hand. Sure enough, she found 2 vegetables tied with rubber bands. After removing the rubber bands, she combed her hair back and tied it into a ponytail. However, because it was not long enough, some strands of hair on both sides of her cheeks fell forward and covered her cheeks. Li Nanheng watched her movements and then looked at her hair for a long time. Feng Ling put away the bundle of vegetables that she had just untied and took out other things from the shopping bag to help him pack up. She subconsciously looked up at him. "What are you looking at?" The little woman's hair was half tied behind her head. Because there was hair on both sides of her cheeks, when she raised her head, she shook her head slightly. Her eyes were clear and clean. Li Nanheng's heart softened. He habitually raised his hand to rub her hair, but when he saw the little tail she had tied up, he subconsciously retracted his hand. In the end, his fingers landed on her cheek and helped her tuck the strand of hair behind her ear. Feng Ling blinked and looked at him. "My hair is long. It's inconvenient to do anything. Can I cut it tomorrow?" She did not say that she was going to cut it, but asked for his opinion. After all, she had heard that men usually liked women with long hair. Although she was not used to it, after being in the jungle for so long, her hair had grown to her neck. No matter how unaccustomed she was, she had gradually gotten used to it. She just felt it was inconvenient occasionally. Do whatever you feel comfortable doing. In my eyes, even if you shave your hair like mine, you'll still look good. The man smiled. Feng Ling was coaxed by his words, and a smile appeared on her face. There are so many ingredients. How long will it take for you to clean up? You didn't eat much at noon. Don't eat too late at night. I'll clean up with you. The man did not stop her. He glanced at her and curved his lips. You're becoming more and more like a virtuous little wife. I'm letting you enjoy more. Now that you're back, you should be more comfortable. I'm quite comfortable. People can only see many things after experiencing some things, but I'm glad that I've seen through them before I experienced them, Feng Ling said as she picked the vegetables. I've thought about the Feng family. In the future, I'll take some time to visit the 2 elders and visit my parents' graves regularly, but life has to continue. The only regret is that small wooden cabin, but I always remember what you said. As long as you're there, it's home, so I actually like to do things with you. This way, there's the feeling of two people living together. I feel very satisfied. Fengling usually did not speak much. Even when she was in the jungle, she often sat by the side and watched Li Nanheng busy himself. She did not say much, but at that time, the smile in her eyes grew wider and wider. This was the first time she had opened her heart to him and told him what was on her mind. It was also the first time she had talked about so many things in her heart. Chapter 1269. It was rare to hear Fengling's heartfelt words. Li Nanheng smiled, wiped his hands clean, and pressed her into his arms. He lowered his head and pressed his forehead against hers. His nose was pressed against hers, and there was only half a finger's distance between their lips, but their breaths were intertwined. "So, you love me very, very much now?" The man's voice was low and husky, and he kissed her on the lips, taking advantage of her. Fengling was just telling him the truth. She didn't know why he was suddenly in heat, and she hadn't washed her hands yet. She quickly stretched out their hands to avoid dirtying his clothes, and then dodged back. "Li Nanheng, don't you know shame in your life? I've just said a word, and you kissed." However, the man directly pecked her lips again. "What are you embarrassed about?" "I really don't know. I only know that you said you like to do anything with me. You said you like the feeling of coexisting with me. This is dependence, understand? Fengling, the days we spent in the jungle have made you completely accustomed to relying on me. No matter what happens in the future, you have to remember this feeling. No matter where you are, you have to think of me first when you encounter something. I will definitely be worthy of your dependence." And, as he spoke, he kissed the corner of her lips. "No matter where you are, I will stand behind you. Where else can I go?" Fengling didn't understand what he meant. She glared at him and quickly pushed him away. "All right, hurry up and wash the vegetables. If you continue to dawdle, you'll probably eat very late tonight." She quickly left the kitchen. Otherwise, this man would probably continue kissing and wasting time. Fengling hadn't used her phone for many months. A few days ago, she had just recharged her phone, but she didn't know many people, so she only used text messages to contact a few familiar people. The others were also members of 11 Base. They all knew her situation, so there was no need to respond. By the time she installed a few new mobile apps that had been released in the past 6 months on her phone, the aroma of hot pot seasoning wafted out of the kitchen. After a while, she put down her phone and did not turn on the TV. The days she used to live in the jungle were even quieter than this, but she didn't feel bored at all. She really liked to watch Li Nanheng by the side, just like how Li Nanheng always liked to watch her in the past. Liking someone and loving someone was like this. There was no need to do anything special. As long as he was by your side and you could look at him closely, it was the greatest satisfaction. She ran to the kitchen door and watched Li Nanheng busy helping her prepare the ingredients for the hot pot. She leaned against the door and watched him. Feeling her gaze, Li Nanheng looked back at her. Their eyes met. Even though the kitchen was filled with the smell of the hot pot and steam was rising from the pot, he could see the great satisfaction in Fengling's eyes. In fact, Fengling was not as cold and unapproachable as she had appeared for many years. She was actually a very simple person. She was so simple that there was no need to specially coax her. She was easily satisfied. "Go get the bowls and chopsticks. I'll bring the hot pot out. It'll be ready soon." Li Nanheng gave her a look. "All right." Fengling cooperatively rushed in to get the cutlery. She quickly walked in and out, placing the cutlery on the dining table one by one. The dinner was very satisfying. This was the first time she had sat at home and eaten so quietly since leaving the jungle. Furthermore, it was the kind of leisurely way where she could take a shower and sleep after eating. Fengling was the one eating most of the time. Li Nanheng kept helping her cook the food she liked. After he was done, he put it into the bowl in front of her. Li Nanheng was a man who didn't care about trifles. Furthermore, he exercised a lot and had a good figure. Under normal circumstances, he would eat more than her, and when he ate with her, he would eat a lot. However, today, with the steaming hot pot in front of him, he didn't seem to eat much. Most of the time, he helped her cook all kinds of food. He only occasionally picked up a few chopsticks. "Aren't you hungry?" Fengling asked. She remembered that he hadn't eaten or slept well recently, and he hadn't eaten much today. I'll watch you eat first. I'm not in a hurry. The man continued to help her cook the meat and put it into the bowl in front of her. At this moment, the man's phone rang. After looking at the caller ID, he signaled for her to eat first and got up to answer the phone. Feng Ling ate the meat in her bowl and turned to look at the man who had walked to the window to answer the phone. From the content of the conversation, it seemed to be about the internal affairs of 11 Base. After listening for a while, she dipped a few pieces of meat and put them into Li Nanhing's bowl. Sure enough, after the man hung up the phone and returned, he saw the meat piled up like a small mountain in the bowl and glanced at her. What? Are you afraid I'll starve? You're treating me like a pig now. I have to do the same. Feng Ling blinked at him. Li Nanhing smiled. In the evening, after dinner, although the hot pot had been removed, every corner of the apartment seemed to be filled with the smell of hot pot. Feng Ling went to take a shower and saw that Li Nanheng, who had already taken a shower, was wearing a dark blue bathrobe and was lying casually on the bed in the bedroom. He was holding a remote control in his hand and watching TV. However, he kept changing the channel, and there seemed to be nothing to watch. The curved screen TV hanging on the bedroom wall kept changing the programs of various channels, and the languages of various countries frequently changed. Feng Ling did not dry her hair. Her body was warm, but her hair was a little cold. She lifted the quilt at the end of the bed and crawled in. Then she crawled out of the quilt and approached the man. She was about to speak when from the corner of her eye, she saw that the file she had placed on the coffee table was placed on the bedside table. She hadn't had the time to look at what was inside all day. She originally wanted to play with him, but she was immediately attracted. She reached out to take a look. What exactly is inside? However, before her hand could touch it, her waist was suddenly held by the man's hand. She was wrapped in a bath towel. When the man turned her over and pressed her down on the bed, he quickly untied her. A few days ago, she didn't even have the time or mood to be intimate in the hospital. Right now, the man seemed to be unable to hold back. He kissed her eagerly, and his breathing was heavy. This was also the first night after leaving the jungle and returning to normal life. Feng Ling's heart warmed, and she took the initiative to respond. The man groaned on her body, and the kiss on her lips almost turned into a fierce bite. This night, it was not an exaggeration to say that they were entangled to death. In the end, Feng Ling lost her strength and fell asleep. However, she woke up before dawn because she had a nightmare and could not sleep. She quietly got up and saw the file on the bedside table. She reached out to take it and opened it. After flipping through page by page, she saw the words Feng Ling and expelled from the base. Her gaze paused, and she abruptly turned to look at the man who had woken up. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.